Okay, we're good to go. Thanks, Mayor.
Yeah. Well, and normally this is a special treat because normally our budget committees are audio recording only because we're in the dais and it's too many hours to have the control booth doing it. So for all those late night community members, you can now watch it live and see all of us. That might be the first time we've done it, so we should fact check that. Okay, so now I'd like to call for the election of officers. And so we have the chair, the vice chair, and secretary. So are there any nominations from the floor? I'll make a nomination for chair then. I nominate John Duggar.
Second.
Are there other nominations for the chair position? Are you making a nomination, Mr. Gall? What are you saying yes to?
Me, Gallo? No, I'm just
Yeah.
I'm just nodding my head up and down with pleasure.
Oh, I thought I just saw you in the chat line. If there's no other nominations, do we want to take a vote on the chair? All those in favor of voting John the chair of the budget committee, just raise your hand and say aye.
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 Any no's? All right, John, the floor is yours. Do I call the nomination for the vice chair? Do I hand it over and now John does it?
Either way would be fine. Now there's a chair, maybe John would go ahead and just do the nomination for chair and vice and secretary.
Happy to hand it over to you, John. Congratulations and thank you for accepting the nomination.
Sure, thank you. I'd like to open the floor then for vice chair nominations.
I'll make a nomination of Hoy. Is that how you say your name? I'm sorry.
Hui? It's like
Hoy, yeah.
W-E-E.
Yeah. Would you accept the nomination for the vice chair position?
I will accept with a lot of support.
Are there other nominations?
Does it need a second? I'll second it if it does.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it probably needs a second.
Second.
Thanks, Nadia. And could you, is it Hui, could you tell me how to pronounce your name again so I don't butcher it?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. It's Hui. It's
Hui.
It's like H-W-E-E kind of
Okay.
stuff.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep.
Any other nominations for vice chair? And Patrick, do I call the vote then?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. We'll call the vote then. All in favor of Hui as vice chair? Raise your hand, I suppose.
Yes.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, the nomination carries. And then for the role of secretary, I'd like to open the floor for nominations for secretary.
Everyone's jumping to the gun tonight. I'll nominate Tiffany to be the secretary if she'll accept the nomination.
Sure.
I hear a nomination for Tiffany for secretary.
Second.
Have a second. What other nominations are there?
That is it for positions.
No, I know. I mean, if there's other, sorry, if there's other secretary candidates. Hearing none, let's call the vote. All in favor of Tiffany Burton for secretary, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations, Tiffany. You are now secretary. So Patrick, I don't know what to do next.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, what I thought we might do is we have open remarks from City Manager Wilson, followed by Mayor Beatty, followed by you as the chair, and then followed by me. But before we get to that point, I thought it might be good to introduce new members to the committee. That would include both of our city council side and our city manager and our budget committee members. So I will just go across my panel and just call on people to introduce themselves, because this is a rather large group and we have new members. So City Manager Wilson, would you like to just introduce yourself, give a little bit of background on your?
Good evening. My name is Kurt Wilson, and I am for just a little bit longer serving as the interim city manager here in Beaverton in what has been a delightful sort of change of pace for me and change of scenery. So as I'm still learning my way through the Oregon budget process, I'm happy to join all of you and will, much like the rest of you, rely very heavily on Patrick, but it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Thank you, Kurt. Next, Councillor Tivnan.
Yes, hi everybody. I'm Allison Tivnan. This is my first time going through this, so I'm doing some weightlifting with this binder and in absolute awe of the time and the care and attention that has gone into creating it. Really looking forward to this discussion tonight and the ones that will come after.
Thank you. Councillor Hassan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nadia Hassan, position 6. Super excited to be here. And I've got the binder right here. I'm ready to go.
Thank you. Our first new member, now serving as vice chair, Mr. Hui Hong. So if you want to give a brief introduction of yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Hui Huang. I am excited to be here as a first time just being involved, and it's just great to meet everybody and learn from everybody. So, and Mayor Beatty, thank you for nominating me. I wasn't expecting that, so thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Hui. Next is member Dave Satsumary, and Dave is going to be serving as an alternate. He is an alternate so that if a position becomes available, we have a person that's been in training. So Dave will serve as an alternate, and he has everything, all the powers of all the committee members except for voting on the actual budget itself for its passage and amendments. So Dave.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. Right now I'm retired, but for 30 years I was the vice provost at the University of Washington and was in charge of non-state funded programs. And I was also on the university budget committee, which was a large budget, including all the medical school and so on and so forth. But I'm happy to be here, happy to be the alternate. Go Huskies.
Go, there you go. And next we have a new member, Cesar Maldonado.
Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here and to work with all of you. And also, I was happy that the budget was really well put together.
Okay, thank you. Then with that, Mr. Chair, if you were to go to your, it's in your budget document. It's going to be your budget agenda. Kind of gives you an idea of where we are. So we've just had our election of officers, introduction of new members, and so we're now at the budget opening remarks. And so, Mr. Chair, if you just wanted to call on the first one would be City Manager Wilson.
Yeah, I'll call on City Manager Wilson for your budget opening remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, I'd like to thank Patrick and the finance team, as well as the executives and finance folks from all of the departments for all their hard work in putting things together. This year's budget is different than others for a number of reasons. First and foremost is the change of government, which has changed not only some of the things that are in the document, but sort of how they got there and the process that went along with it. So it's a bit of a working process. And then on top of that, we add the COVID impacts, and we think of the revenue impact that come along with COVID, but we've also had expenditure impacts that have come along with COVID because we're spending money on things that we wouldn't otherwise do. Then the next layer to sort of offset many of those COVID related issues are the ARPA funds. So the upcoming federal funds that will in some way provide some additional options for sort of going forward. The timing of all that makes it very, very difficult to sort of sequence things. So for what you'll see for particularly for the budget presentations is relatively status quo, not because that would be the preferred method, but because I was hesitant to sort of rock the boat just for this interim period and then have my successor make many other changes when that person gets here as well. So I wanted to be cautious of that piece. So as we go through the presentations, you'll find that we are aiming toward brevity, but we don't mean for that to imply that we don't want you to ask questions or feel comfortable. We want to make sure that you feel comfortable and have your questions answered and have a good sense of what's going on. But we also recognize that you've got a lot of work ahead of you and we want to be mindful on the staff side not to take up more of your time than we need to. So again, to the extent that we cut out something that you're really interested in hearing about, we welcome the opportunity to hear from you. We will be taking diligent notes as we go forward and sort of try to make the last few adjustments and changes to make everything happen. And the budget that you have been poring over for the last little bit, you'll see is a very sort of baseline budget. It's a very basic budget, and in its current form does omit a number of council priorities, largely because the financial constraints of COVID made it necessary to make some significant cuts. The good news is there are some options for sort of making those adjustments, but those are options to be made by the policymakers rather than the proposal. So it's a bit of an unusual budget in that it will be missing some things that I suspect you will go through and make the additions for, and we're prepared to do all those things. So with that, thank you all, and we're looking forward to getting things kicked off.
Thank you, City Manager Wilson. Appreciate your remarks. Mayor Beatty, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Duggar. I just want to thank Kurt and Patrick and the team for putting together the budget. This is the first time in close to 30 years that it's not a mayor's budget, it is the council's budget. So I'll be participating tonight. While this is my 7th budget committee and first one as mayor, I'm participating alongside the rest of you. So I think Mr. Wilson put it pretty together. It's a pretty status quo budget as we kind of work through the nuances of COVID, bringing on an interim city manager. What I appreciate the most about budget is reading other people's questions. It tells me how they're looking at the budget, which is often different than me, the questions they're asking. So I definitely would encourage you, if you have questions over the next couple nights, to submit them in writing, because and likely someone else has the same similar question, but I do appreciate how people ask and answer the question. And I like that our budget shows information in multiple ways, like how it's laid out, so you can read it, different numbers. I know it takes a long time to read this, so on behalf of the city and the city council, thank you for choosing this really important public service and how we measure what we treasure and we spend money based on our values. So thank you for participating and thank you for being with us over the next couple nights.
Thank you, Mayor Beatty. Since I did not plan on being chair until 8 minutes ago, I do not have prepared remarks, but I will just say, first of all, thank you to everyone who participates in this process. 1,000 pages of reading is not light reading, but it's very important reading. Thank you to many, many mentors, the city council, the mayor, certainly the city staff who prepare this amazing document. And the many of you in the community that put your time in. I continue to be at awe in how transparent and open our city is. I continue to be a proud member of this board and this committee who looks at this in this community. Thank you so much. Mr. O'Clair, I believe you're up next.
Okay, I'll call on Susan to bring up our PowerPoint presentation. I emailed this to the committee members earlier, so at least you might have had a chance to review it, hopefully, and then maybe have some questions. So as City Manager Wilson mentioned, I view this budget as kind of a budget in transition, transitioning from a strong mayor form of government to a city manager council form of government, and the council being a lot more driven of how the budget is going to be shaped from this day going forward. And so this budget does have COVID-19 restrictions and revenues, and that has caused us to do some kind of belt tightening from what some of the departments wanted to propose in their budget. And as the budget was presented, the detail in the budget document shows what was originally asked. That's under what's called the proposed budget. And then after going through internal review, where we had to make some cuts, mainly in the general fund, that's where you see changes made to the recommended budget. And then as we go through this process and make amendments to the recommended budget, it gets posted to the adopted budget. So there's a kind of a track record of going from what was originally proposed by the departments, what was changed in internal budget review, and then it will be changed through the budget committee process. So Susan, let's go to the first slide. So just kind of an overview, our budget is about $441 million, mainly a lot of beginning working capital balances, a lot due to bond issue funds that we have on books and that will be spent in water and on some of our special revenue projects. Taxes, which includes right-of-ways, are next largest, and including intergovernmental revenues. Intergovernmental revenues are so high this year because of the ability to borrow money from the federal government for some of our projects, meaning on the WIFIA program loan, and through the state for some of our water projects. Let's go to the next slide. On the expenditure side, personal services continues to be, outside of capital outlay, our largest expenditure of our budget. And then the largest one being capital outlay. And that includes not only our, what we call our infrastructure, which is our water, sewer, storm, and street budgets, but also our civic projects. We're finishing the Patricia Research Center for the Arts project, the parking garage project, starting off the new redo of the city park fountain project, and finishing up the Gateway project. So that's also included in our capital outlay activity. And then the other items are just debt service is at 14 million. It's increasing because we had 2 new bond issues, actually 3 bond issues that we have new for debt service this year. The first one being our 2020 water revenue bond issue, and then the $90 million special revenue bond issue, which was broken into 2 pieces, $55 million for the Urban Renewal Agency, and then the remaining funding was for the city for its projects, meaning our $21 million for the Patricia Research Center for the Arts project campaign, and about $14 million for other city projects. Next slide. And Mr. Chair and the committee, please feel free to ask any questions during the presentation if you have any items coming up or you think of something else. We are continuing. This next schedule was a table that we had proposed last year based on comments from, I want to say, Councilor Sancisi, to present the budget kind of not in expense categories and revenues, but by function. And so this kind of shows you how much we spend on our public works department, again, our infrastructure projects, our police department, community development, municipal court, and so on. And we thought that this would be helpful for the community to see how actions or the total budget is divided based upon different categories or functions of government. Next slide, please, Susan. So in the budget that we have this year, we are establishing 2 new funds. The first one is Fund 102, and it's in what we call our special revenue group of accounts. Meaning it's not the general fund, and it's not an enterprise fund such as water, sewer, and storm, but there's a special revenue source that the city is receiving, and it's under the Federal American Rescue Plan Act. And we are going to receive approximately $16.5 million for the city to use at the council's discretion for projects and for activities in our next in the budget. And so for this fiscal year, the way it's structured is that we'll receive basically half of it probably within the next week, and then the other half will come in May of next year. And so the budget does have this funding. In the supplemental budget that we'll be reviewing on Thursday evening, we have a proposed designation of using $3 million of this funding to help us with what we call revenue loss backfill, and that is in the general fund for $2 million and $1 million in the building fund. This is needed for us to help bolster some of the revenue losses that we have in those 2 funds, especially for the operations of the building fund, because it is so heavily personnel supported. And I just wanted to give a kind of a kudos to the city administration in going through the COVID-19 pandemic responses and the changes. We did lose a lot of revenue, and the council has been apprised of that periodically through the budget, including the budget committee. We reviewed that in November of what I thought the losses would be. And with all of those losses, the city did not have any reductions in force. We did not lay off any employees. And so we made a conscious decision as a city that through at least this fiscal year ending June 30th, there would be no FTE reductions due to COVID-19. Now, doing that caused some of these funds to have a what we call a pressure point, especially in the building fund, because not only we have staffing continue, we have declining revenues just due to development. And so part of the request in the supplemental budget that we're reviewing on Thursday is to approve using $3 million of the ARPA, we call the ARPA funding for backfill. The remaining of the funding will be dedicated and allocated according to the City Council and during the next fiscal year. And what's interesting about this funding, although we have it says the timeline for spending is December 2024, that date is for obligations. So we could actually obligate funding out of ARPA in December of 2024. We have almost 2 more years to then expend it. So if you wanted to do some sort of a construction project using the ARPA funding and you did a contract in December of 2024, you would have up to 2 years to actually spend that money. So actually for spending the money, it's actually through December of 2026. Any questions on this new fund? Okay, continuing on, we have a new fund in the Urban Renewal District, and it's Fund 905, we're calling it. It's the Bureau of Parking Facilities Fund. And this is a fund that we will have going forward to manage our new parking garage and its revenues and expenses for managing the parking garage, plus also the surface parking management within the Urban Renewal District. And so we will be taking a look at adding that particular fund. And in fact, there will be an amendment that we'll be considering on the as part of the budget deliberations to make some enhancements to Fund 905, because when we first prepared the budget, we kept it as kind of what we call a static one revenue, one program fund. And actually we want to have separate program revenues and separate program expenses tracked separately from and independently within the fund. And so there's an amendment coming forward to actually create 905 as a fund that keeps program revenues separately from and expenditure separately for different programs. And the programs would be 1, the parking garage, and then 2, the surface parking district. And then 3, we do have plans, hopefully, to complete another parking garage in Old Town. And so that will be a second parking garage that we need to create a program to manage its operations, both revenues and expenses. So any questions on these 2 new funds? And if not, we can go to the next slide, Susan. As I mentioned, this is a very high level. The City Council and the budget has seen schedules that talk about our revenue shortfalls, our reductions due to COVID-19. And this actually spans 3 fiscal years, last fiscal year, March through June, this fiscal year, and then continuing into next fiscal year, because there are some still reductions or revenue adjustments that we've had to make, especially in the lodging tax fund and in the building fund. General fund should be coming back pretty much, I hope, hopefully to it's what I would call its full revenue stream, probably about mid next fiscal year. And same with the street fund as gas tax revenues come back up to normal operations. But we will continue to see reductions in revenue sources that in the building fund and the lodging tax fund for probably not only this next fiscal year, 21, 22, but especially for the lodging tax fund, maybe in 22, 23. Continue on the next slide, Susan. Susan, I'll turn this over to you because since you prepared this nice schedule, and it has to do with COVID-19 also.
Yes, thank you. So this is a snapshot of our utility billing delinquencies that are past due 120 days or more. So for our utility funds, it's not so much a revenue drop like those funds Patrick just went over. It is more measured in how many of our customers are behind on their payments. And so what this chart tells you is we have experienced an increase in delinquencies. So we suspended our shutoffs for non-pay back in April of 2020. Generally, when customers do not pay, we give them 60 or so days to come current on their bill or to make an arrangement with us. And then if nothing happens, we do shut their water off. And we did suspend that in April of 2020. And this shows you that accounts have become delinquent. In December, the CARES Act through Washington County Community Action did cease to have funding available for our customers. And so We did see a little bit of an uptick. You'll see there from November to January, the curve gets a little bit more steep because prior to that, we did have some CARES Act funding helping. And currently we do have our own city funding that we are extending to customers for financial assistance. We have roughly $5,000 left and 1 month yet to go in the fiscal year. We do expect to spend all of that financial assistance for our customers in this fiscal year. And then it starts over. If the committee and the council approves this budget that you're considering, then that financial assistance basically starts over July 1st. So we're not overly concerned at this point in time. You can see the red dots on this chart. That represents 1% of our annual revenue. We'll bring in approximately $53 million in utility revenue, and that's all utilities combined, water, sewer, and stormwater. And so we're still fairly comfortable with the rate of delinquent right now. Our staff are doing an excellent job reaching out to customers, making payment arrangements. We do not have a standard payment arrangement. We listen to the customer and apply a payment arrangement according to their need. And so some customers just need another month. Some customers need 6 or 7 months. And so we just listen to them and help them with those arrangements. They are not on this chart. This is just people who have not communicated with us at all and have not paid their bill. So really, I look at this as actually pretty good considering the times that we're in. We're just at 0.25% of annual revenue, and we will continue to monitor this.
Thank you, Susan. I think I want to recognize Member Kamath for a question.
Yes, I have a quick question. Do we have a subdivision of this by residential and commercial customers?
No, I'm sorry, we do not. This is all customers combined. We can certainly look into our utility database to see. We are currently running a 20-year-old software system. So I'm not sure if we can do that, but I will certainly look into it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Susan, just to follow up on that, we are still in a non-shut-off period. And until we receive direction from the city manager and the city council, we will continue to be in a non-shut-off process until at such time that they give us direction to go ahead and continue with the shut-off process. And we imagine that shut-off process will be kind of like a soft rollout, not shutting off everything all at once, but reaching our customers saying that, you know, we will be conducting or doing shut-offs in the future when that future date is made, to give some time to prepare of how to bring them whole. And also at that time, we'll have another set of funding in the fiscal year budget for next year to provide customer assistance. Okay, Susan, next slide.
I think we have one more question, okay. Patrick. Recognize Member Gallo.
Thank you, Chair John. Susan, you said there was 5,000 remaining on that account. What was the beginning balance, or what did the account start with, if you could?
Oh, yes, excellent question. We started the fiscal year with $36,000 spread out among the utility funds. So, and we run that through community action. So we do refer our customers to community action. And if staff in their judgment feels that a person has a barrier to getting to community action for whatever reason, then they work with them and hear basically their narrative, their story, and then extend the assistance. So it's not a 100% requirement, but we do like customers to go to community action because they get that wraparound service if they need help with housing costs or their heat bill or their electricity bill. So that's why we like to utilize the partnership with community action.
Mr. Chair, I would also say that even towards the end of the year, if we run short of the $5,000, the utility funds have enough available spending authority to be able to continue to assist customers past that $5,000 remaining left amount.
Yeah, and we do split that. We have a revenue share agreement with Clean Water Services. So Clean Water Services is responsible for roughly 84% of the sewer portion. And so while the 36,000 doesn't sound like a lot, the sewer and the stormwater are in partnership with Clean Water, so there's an offset a little bit with them.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. So not only do we have reduced revenues, but we have some costs to absorb within the existing budget. So we have cost of living adjustments built into next year's budget. On average, citywide, with all management, all groups of employees, it's about 2.17%, and that total citywide cost with all the roll-ups to payroll is about 1.6 million. The next item on personnel costs is we have new biennium rates beginning July 1st, 2021 for our retirement system. And for fiscal year 22, it's going to add 2.4 million to our operating costs. And then that will then continue into to fiscal year 23. It'll increase it a little bit just with a COLA to be another 2.5 million. And then what I expect in the following biennium, that would be fiscal years 24 and 25, will probably be another similar increase of PERS costs. So our net with fiscal year 22 and 23, we'll have a new baseline, including another 2.4 and 2.5 million. And then the following year, we'll have another increase of I think, at least that much. So on our contribution rates, we are up to now about 30.42% of payroll costs for tier 1 and tier 2, 23.8 and 28.15 for ops or police. And continue. Okay. In taking a look at development activities and working with Cheryl and her staff, we determined that with the downturn in the development that we're currently seeing, it will probably be picking up next year. But we have positions that became vacant the latter part of this year, and we are choosing not to fill them in this next year's budget. So there are a total of about 3.5 FTE in the general fund and site development. And if those positions were in the budget, it would be about another $505,000 for those positions. The same in the building fund, we have the authority of FTEs and classifications, and we have current vacancies, and we are choosing to hold those positions vacant. The budget will still show that the FTE is there, but there's just no funding for an FTE for each of those classifications. And that's a total of 5 FTE. And that's about $656,000.
Patrick, is the expectation that development will remain low, or is this, or these positions not needed, or what are we thinking about? Because if it seems like development's starting to pick back up, is that a consideration?
Yes. So if it does start to pick back up, we would need to come back either to the city council in a transfer resolution or to the budget committee in the supplemental budget to add funding to these positions. But right now, we feel comfortable, at least through the first part of this next fiscal year, that they remain vacant. And that if things change and we need to have people come back to assist with the backlog of work, especially in the site development and the building fund, then we will bring those forward.
Okay, and it looks like member Gallo also has a question. Gallo, you have the floor.
I do. Thank you, Chair Duggar. So Patrick, I just wanted to make sure I understood it correctly. The table that is on page 7 of the transmittal of the city manager's budget message, which has a table of detailing the number of heads. So these heads these positions that are not filled yet or have been open, they're still part of the 630.76. They're also part of the 633. Is that correct?
Yes, so that they are included in those FTE counts. They're just not funded.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Susan, next slide. So there are other expenditure or reductions or things that were brought forward for consideration. So this budget does not include 12 personnel requests that the departments came forward and wanted to have funded. I believe that was attached to the city manager's budget message as Exhibit 2, kind of showing those positions. Although I did want to mention that on Exhibit 2 and after the city manager's budget message, There was one item, it was called a facilities maintenance tech. It shows as being, it was asked and it wasn't filled. At the seventh hour of putting the budget together, we came up with a proposal to move one of the building permit technician FTEs from building to the general fund to fill this position. And in fact, the person that will be moving into this position has actually been filling in since January 1st of this year in that role in our city facilities group. And the general fund has been reimbursing the building fund for that FTE that's been kind of on loan to the facilities group. And this new facilities maintenance tech, it's pretty timely because what we have we will have 2 new buildings coming online for us to manage, and that's going to be the PRCA and the parking garage. And so with those 2 buildings coming online, we thought it was a good move to do that, move of that FT from the building department to the city's general fund for building maintenance. We also delayed the building roof replacement on the Beaverton building till next fiscal year, not this coming fiscal, but the following fiscal year. And there's some COVID-19 business assistance that was asked by the departments to continue our COVID-19 business assistance programs, but with the general funds reduction in revenues, continued expenses, and especially in COLA, PERS, and keeping the city whole, not laying anybody off, that we couldn't fund those types of activities. And then the travel and training budget, departments kind of were put together kind of like a full back to normal operations for travel and training. And through internal budget review, we said, we'll fund you half of that, and we'll see how it goes going into the year, because we just don't think the travel is going to really pick up for the way it used to be for travel, for conferences and training as they had in the previous years pre-COVID-19. Next slide, Susan.
We have a question from Mayor Beatty.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just on the travel one, Patrick, how did you take into account jobs that required licensure? Like, how were those reduced? And the police budget was also vastly reduced, and each one of them have a requirement for training to keep their license. So how did you balance those things?
Yeah, so we figured that within their total appropriation, by putting them in half, would at least give them the funding that they would need to do their certifications, knowing that a lot of certifications now going into at least the next year is going to be probably virtual and not requiring full travel of out-of-state travel with hotel and airfare.
Thank you.
And if we need to make adjustments for critical training needs, we can certainly make adjustments going forward. Okay, next slide, Susan. This was kind of in response to a question asked by Councillor Sansusi about how we're meeting our fund balance targets. And so Susan had already put this in our presentation, and it kind of gives you where we believe our contingency target is. Now, we do have 2 targets. We have one on the budget, which is what we see today in this column where it says percent of expenditures, where we see 11% and 42%. That is on a budgetary basis. When we go to actuals, they go a little bit higher when we close out the year. But even with the general fund in its state, with having $5 million of contingency and fund balance, we're still about $4.2 million short of our 11% goal of having that amount of contingency. We should have 9.4 and we have 5.1. So you can see that COVID-19 has affected us in the areas where we have revenues coming in from that were COVID-19 impacted: general fund, street fund for all of the things, gas tax and vehicle registrations, building fund for all the building permit fees, TLT fund for transient lodging taxes.
Patrick, I have a quick question, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time for it, but is there a way to tie these funds to city council past priorities? And I'm thinking, and this was a question from a neighbor, like all of the priorities around the climate action fund, for instance, or the active transportation plan. It's really hard to parse where those fit in the budget because they cross a number of different things. So I didn't know if there's a way to present that information by fund or what makes sense.
So on the stability side, especially those two things, we do have our sustainability program in the general fund, and that will be reviewed on Monday in the city managers group of activities. And so they will have some presentation of things that are in their budget. As far as the active transportation plan, that would be more on the engineering side, on the community, and maybe Chad can touch on that tonight during his presentation on the public works side of the budget.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Councillor Sansusi.
Oh, thank you. I'll just add a little comment to that. There have been a number of years, not every year, but relatively steady, where our senior staff have presented an annual summary to the council of how the council priorities from earlier in the year have been addressed. It's challenging, and I understand that it's challenging to tie those specifically to portions, to elements in the budget. But we do ask for and look forward to, when it is available, that summary of how the council priorities from the last priorities discussion are being or have been addressed. COVID, I believe, has caused a little complication this year. So my expectations are a little lower, but I'm hoping that next year we can see that start to come back.
Thanks so much, Councillor Sansusi. Councillor Fagan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Patrick, on a week from today, will we be able to reserves as we sum up the budget and look at not alternatives, but basically a plan for how we will be able to build back to what the minimum reserve balances are that are in our policy?
Sorry about that, Councillor. So, Councillor, your question got a little bit broken up, at least on my end. I don't know if anybody had that also issue. Could you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah. So when we wrap up the budget, so next week, will we be able to look at the contingency fund balances compared to what the policy is for contingency fund balances, and where there are deficits, like in this slide, it shows a number of deficits. If you could propose or explain ideas for how we could build those back. My concern about contingencies and why we came up with the policy in the first place was, once you start to lose contingency, building it back is extremely difficult. And making sure that we are cognizant of what our decisions are is, I think, really important to the long-term budget health of the city. So your recommendations.
Yes, I will be able to do that for Thursday and provide probably a little bit more. We have a larger schedule that would go through each fund and give you a little bit more detail, and I can address that on next Thursday.
Of course you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like we also have a question from Member Gallo. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Duggar. Yeah, and this is, it's more a comment than a question. And Councillor Fagan, it's been many a year, I think, that we've had the general fund at 15%, which is the target, or a library fund. I distinctly remember it being in the single digits. So I agree with where you're going. I like where you're going. I'm not sure that, or maybe at the same time that we have that discussion, we probably ought to have the discussion of whether or not 15% across the board is the right target or not, because we've operated for many years in some funds comfortably under that, because again, we're very conservative, tend to be a very conservative spender. We receive more, we budget less. So on paper, it looks like it might be 11%, but it winds up being 17 or 18 at the end of the year. So as long as that pattern continues, again, I would ask ourselves if 15% is the right target. So I love where you're going. I just want to make sure we shape it in the realm of asking ourselves first, what is the right target? You okay with that?
Councillor Fagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's why the policy has different stages for target at this point in our budget, a target at supplemental, so that we recognize the fact that typically when we go from budget to amended budget after we close the year formally, the numbers do rise. So the targets do change, but we do have a target for right now. And I just want to make sure we are all aware of that and that we have a plan, even though it might take more than 1 year to get back.
Thank you, Counselor. Recognize member, is it Zatmary? Did I get that
Perfect.
correct?
Yes,
Thank
perfect.
you.
Quick question. What is the difference between a reserve and a contingency in the budget?
Members Hatsmary, that is a great question. A reserve is something that has been kind of designated by the city council, and there is an actual page of that in your budget document. If you were to go to that, under the citywide summary tab, and if you're to go to pages
11
and 11, it kind of gives you the designations of the reserves on page 11. And instead of going through that at this time, what we could do, if you could take a look at that, and then if you have any questions, maybe ask that. And I do also have this scheduled to bring forward in additional presentation materials if the council would, if the budget committee would like me to. Okay. With that, any other questions? I'll go to page 12, and I think that's kind of our last slide, isn't it, Susan? Yeah, questions. So that is my opening comments. Now, I would like to go over a couple of items that have been brought forward for our consideration. And so, first of all, I would like to point out that we did receive our a budget award from GFOA, the Government Financiers Officers Association, for this year's budget. It's our 33rd consecutive recipient of this award. I just wanted to give a thanks to the City Finance Department team, especially Joanne Harrington, who not only put together this wonderful 1,200-page document that you have before you, but she also puts together what we call the pretty budget for the Government Finance Officers Association. Just wanted to give thanks to her and all of the staff in the Finance Department for bringing that together. Going forward, I would like to bring forward, just to make sure that we have a chance to go over some things that I sent earlier today. And the first one is going to be our budget amendment packet. And so, Susan, I'm going to be logging in as a second person on my desktop here at home. So if you could maybe permit me to come in.
Okay.
Oh, it wants my credentials again.
Great time to take a stretch break.
Yeah, it might be a good time it's excellent time for a stretch break. Okay, so I'm going to mute myself. And then I'm going to share my screen. So I did want to go over what we call amendment packet number 1. We have 3 packets of amendments that are proposed. And this will be presented also in conjunction with some of the department's activities. But the first item that we would like to bring forward for the consideration for an amendment is to add additional FTE for a management analyst in the Public Works Administration Fund. So that will help with managing projects and coordinating with our external partners and our community about projects coming forward in our water, sewer, and storm activities. The next one, and it's a rather large amendment because it's funded by transfers from other funds to fund this position in what we call our Public Works Administration Fund. The next one is to add to eliminate a project engineer position and create a project manager position. It was determined by the Public Works Department that there's a vacancy in an engineering division as an engineer, and the best use of resources that we would need would be to kind of reduce this classification and bring on a project manager that can help, again, with coordinating projects, not only within the city, but within our community. In the general fund community development department, their transportation planning, they have a current senior transportation planner that will become vacant, and they would like to classify that down from a senior transportation planner to just a senior planner, still remaining in transportation. So that'll be a little bit of a savings to the general fund. In the community development, between the site development division and the planning division, they would like to take one of the positions that were eliminated, and the funding has already been removed from the proposed budget, but they would like to reclassify that position to a planning recorder. It's a new position that will assist with doing the planning recording of activities at the Planning Commission. That seems to be getting a lot more requirements of existing staff, and they would like to have a dedicated resource to help with the Planning Commission meetings and recording and taking care of all of the requirements for notification and for filing of that Planning Commission activity. The next one is the Human Resources Department. It's to kind of reclassify the title of one of their existing employees from a large title, which is an HR employee labor relations manager, to a human resources manager. There's no change in salary, but just a change in their title. But then it would also, they would like to then take and have a human resource specialist reclassified to a human resource analyst position, a slight increase in the activity. And then capital development engineering, we heard from the council last couple of weeks about needing to make sure our projects are continuing, especially in the water fund. And so it was recommended to come forward with an amendment to create an additional project engineer position in the city's water fund. The next one is kind of nice. We've got a small increase in our what we call our community development block grant award from the federal government. And so this just recognized the additional $10,000 in revenue, and then putting it into what we call uncommitted grant funds, so that staff can then bring forward to council how we would want to spend that extra $10,000 in federal grant revenue. And then the last one so far is number 9, is to add a module to what's called our Zen City software that will greatly assist the revitalization and kick off our community visioning plan. And this will allow to use that tool for surveys and community trends and analysis. And I'm sure that the department will give it further explanation of the need for this particular software enhancement coming forward in their budget presentation.
Thank you, Patrick. Looks like we'll recognize Member Gallo.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair Duggar. Patrick, just to recap on this, it looks like there's really just one head count add. The rest are reclassifications. Is that correct? Or is it one head count add or 2?
There's 2 head count adds. So you have the
and the rest are reclassifications. Thank you.
Okay. So let me stop this share and continue on with another share. I'd like to take a look at amendment packet number 2 that hopefully you had a chance to take a look at. And this is brought forward by Mayor Beatty. And she would like to consider having the council and the budget committee bring forward a new classification called an assistant city manager, and taking a look at running the city as it gets a little bit more complex and going under a city council manager form of government. There's a need to have an assistant city manager to assist the city manager in managing the day-to-day operations of the city. So that will be something that will be being presented and ask for a concerted deliberation during next Thursday's meeting. And there could be some further discussion about this on Monday's presentation of the city manager's department. They could talk about the need for this position further. And then the last budget amendment that I'd like to take a look at is amendment packet number 3. And those members that are on the Bureau Budget Committee that met on Tuesday, they also approved this. This is since the Bureau is a separate board, but it's also a component unit of the city. All the actions that happen with Bureau is also part of the city's budget. So the Bureau Budget Committee approved this amendment to again take that new Fund 905 and create it under a program revenue, a program expense basis. And so this amendment will do that activity, and it was approved and passed by the Bureau Budget Committee on Tuesday. So it's kind of like almost a given that we would then forward and approve this particular amendment at the amendment time on next Thursday. With that, Mr. Chair, coming up on 7 o'clock. I could do some additional presentations if there's any questions on the mayor's budget message, the citywide revenues and expenditures, reserves and contingencies, if any of the budget members would like me to address those.
First, I'll recognize Councillor Sansucci for a question or a comment.
It'll be more in the nature of a comment, but thank you very much, Mr. Auclair, for all the overview. And thank you also, Mr. Wilson, for the city manager message and the detail that's provided there. I think the comment I want to make is regards something that we will at some point discuss perhaps during the course of these budget meetings, but certainly the city council will have to have some discussions about this. And that is the 2 exhibits attached to the city manager's message, which detail the various additional reductions that were made to the budget and to the FTE requests from the departments as a result of the downturn in revenues caused by COVID. All of those were carefully thought through by all the departments and the finance team and the city manager. There was a lot of very careful thought that went into that. But a lot of that was done with the understanding that there might be money coming from the federal government for backfilling some of the revenue gaps. So I think one of the activities that the budget committee and or the city council may need to engage in is to walk through those items and consider which of those, if any, we would want to restore into the budget using the federal ARPA funds as the backfill for that. I do not have a specific proposal that I want to get into right now. I'm a little bit concerned that there's enough detail in there that it may be difficult for us even to get to that as a budget committee in our 3 evenings, since there's so many other things we have to address. But I just wanted to make sure that I called attention to it because I think it's a really important task for us collectively to think through in the context of putting together the final budget for the city, given that the ARPA funds have actually landed on Planet Beaverton, which is great. So I have those pages printed out, they're on my desk, and whenever the time is right to talk about them, I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks so much, Councillor Sansucci. Recognize Councillor Fagan.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted Patrick to point out one thing that probably should be fixed before this goes to final print. And that's in the city manager's report on 7. It says the city council program includes a program specialist position to assist the city council. The accurate way is to report that is that the position is actually to support our mayor. At this point, there isn't anyone directly in the position to support council, which is okay. I don't have a problem with any of it. It's just I want to make sure we're clear to the public about what that position is and who that position supports.
Mr. Chair, if I could just address that. So this position was specifically put in the budget for the city council because the mayor has two positions already funded in this year's budget and continuing in next year's budget. So this was a specific ask that was brought forward as part of the city council to have this position specifically for the city council support.
Okay, so that's the unfilled position that we're creating?
Yeah, so it's
Okay,
created effective July 1st. I think it's actually August 1st because it's gonna take a while to hire, but it is actually for your support. Of the
Okay,
city.
hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that.
Okay, yeah, so that will be discussed and under the city council, mayor city council budget. You will see it as an actual new FTE fiscal year 21-22. With that, Mr. Chair, I would like to address Councilor Sansuzi's comments about the ARPA funding. The rules governing that are coming out day by day. In fact, we had the seminar yesterday. I attended one today. And even how to do the backfill of revenues is very intricate because it's not by fund, it's by category of revenues for the city in total, not including our utilities. So it's just going to be like the general fund, building, street, TLT fund, and they have you do a benchmark year, inflate that by 4.1% per year, compare it to what you're getting, and then if there's a difference, then you can do some backfill. So I'm pretty confident that we will have additional capacity to backfill of revenue for the general fund and possibly the building fund and TLT if that's what the council would like to do. So I have no issue with that. Going forward, of all the things that were reduced in the budget, affordable housing, those reductions, I think there's direct nexus as to what is allowable under the ARPA funding to fund those. And as you know, this is quite kind of our budget in the biggest transition, going from COVID-19 to coming out of COVID-19, the ARPA funding, going from council, strong mayor form of government to council city manager form of government, a lot of transition. And so we have a lot of flexibility as the budget year plays out to make adjustments. So I don't want to put undue pressure on the budget committee and the city council to make decisions in the next 3 days, because we have basically 364 days to make changes to next year's budget starting July 1st, excuse me.
Yeah, and I assumed it was going to be a process and not a very quick process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Councilor Hassan.
Hi, this is super minor, and if there's another place to bring this up, let me know. On the city manager message on page 3, the 3 eyes, under focus in the second paragraph, it says May of 2020 and not May of 2021. Super minor, just want to make sure somebody knows about it. And if I need to email someone in the future, I'm happy to do that too.
Thank you, I've got that noted. And just let you know where we're at in the process of registering the city for this. It is a pretty extensive registration process. I had to get a lot of personal identification on me personally to be able to be the city's representative to be able to register for this. There's also a terms and conditions that is going through the city attorney's review right now of things that we have to agree to in receiving the federal funding. And we just need to make sure that we're in compliance with this because it talks about the different titles of federal government, things that we need to be in compliance with, including such things as if we have contractors that we're going to be contracting with, that they have a no cell driving, no talking in your cell phone policy within their realm of their operations. So it's detail that needs to be vetted by the city attorney, and then Mr. Wilson will sign that. I think that's the last piece that I need to then submit to the portal for receiving that funding, and then theoretically we will receive half of our funding shortly after all the documents are processed.
Thank you, Patrick. Recognize Member Gallo.
Thank you, Chair Duggar. Patrick, looking at the table in Mr. Wilson's page 9. Beaverton Urban, the combined budget tables for expenditures on personnel services. And trusty calculator. I'm struggling to understand why, with only 3 or 4 increase, only three or four heads increasing, we're going from personnel services 81 million to 91 million. It's 10 million. I mean, it doesn't, I mean, it just doesn't add up. I mean, so, okay, so 2.5 million more in PERS. Okay, 2.5% COLA. That still doesn't, you know, it still gets me 87 million, not 86 million, not 91. I mean, am I missing something? Is why is that a $10 million increase? I don't see that in what we've talked. In the numbers that we've been talking about with expense additions and personnel additions, I don't see 11 million bucks, so I'm confused.
Okay, Mr. Gallo, I have a good explanation for that. And let me share screen here and see if we can maybe discuss this a little bit.
And again, I ask this question only because we've been extremely predictable in these categories, and thank you. And this one just can get to it.
So, Mr. Galindez, you're talking about comparing this $81 million to 91?
Correct. Thank you. Yes.
So really, we need to compare this $86 million to the 91 because the 81 takes into consideration vacancies during the year, and we've had quite a few of them. So when we budget for positions, we budget for them being in the seat 100% of the time, 100% of the year. And that's what the $86 million is compared to. And when we go from 86 to 91, that's about 4 million. We know that we have $2.5 million more in PERS costs. We have $1.6 million more in cost of living, and then we have the 3 or 4 FTEs. So that should get you pretty close to where you need to be.
That's exactly what that's exactly what thank you. That's exactly what I figured, that it was going to be something like 5. I just couldn't get to K from I. Thank you for explaining it.
Okay. Thank you. With that, Mr. Chair, if there's no other talks of either the citywide revenues, expenditures, reserves, contingencies, I will be preparing the fund balance targets for presentation, and hopefully I'll get it to you in advance of that so you have some time to look at it for next Thursday. I think that I'm done with my opening remarks and comments unless there's other questions of the committee.
Okay, I don't see any names. So is this the time, Patrick, that we open the meeting for general public input?
Yes, and so Susan can look in the general public and see if there's anybody there that would like to speak.
Yeah, it looks like we have 3 attendees. We would like to ask the public attendees now if they could raise their hand. And I guess there's one person on the phone. If they could press *9, that would raise their hand if they have questions. So the floor is open now.
This is Susan. Yeah, I don't see anyone raising their hand that they would like to add public comment.
Perfect. You answered my question. I was going to ask, what is an appropriate amount of time? And
Okay.
What is the next step, Patrick?
So
Do we just begin?
Yep. So unless you would like to take any type of a break or anything like that, we would start with the city attorney review.
Very quick poll of everyone. Give me a thumbs up. Do we need a 5-minute break or a thumbs down if we're good to go? Thumbs up if you need a 5-minute break. What do you guys think? Down? Okay, looks like the consensus is to keep going. I'll turn it over to Mr. Kirby.
Thank you, Chair Duggar and Budget Committee members. Good evening, and second year from the spare bedroom addressing the Budget Committee. The whole COVID-19, it seems like. Sometimes it gets tiring, but tonight it's going to be a fairly straightforward presentation. I'd like to stop on 4 pages. I'll give you those pages in a moment, talk a little bit about what's there, and then open to any questions you might have. The first page I'm going to refer to is page 59, budget highlights. Just give you an overview of, we are asking for funding for a 0.25 FTE on call a part-time prosecutor. This is important because we're right at the cusp of having too much work for 2 prosecutors. And anytime one of those prosecutors goes away for an extended period of time, particularly without some advance notice, we had that happen this year, we need to have someone who's on call and trained in our software system. It's not just that you have a law degree that allows you to use our software system. And we've identified one of these people, and we'd like to keep her on contract, and she's available as we need her. And that's a very important request for that 0.25 FTE on-call part-time prosecutor. The other thing that's happening, and remember, we wrote this budget document, at least I wrote the budget document that you're reading in March. In March, we had no idea that we would find funding potentially for the behavioral health court, which we now have found potential funding in the amount of almost $750,000. It's grant funding. It's not yet a certainty, but if we do expand the Beaverton Health Court, it will have demands on the prosecution team. So I've talked to Finance Director Patrick O'Clair about this. It's a part of a bigger conversation about the behavioral health court and its impacts on the city. But I wanted to point out that as you expand that program, that will directly have an impact on the prosecution. As noted in the budget highlights, the 0.25 FTE on-call part-time prosecutor, if we turn that into a 0.5 full-time FTE equivalent, that person could do the same things. So there's a little bit of, as you work through the bigger picture of the behavioral health court, I want you to keep the prosecution team in mind, and we're open to any suggestions you have in terms of how you coordinate this. My one other observation is, as we ramp up the behavioral health court, it is not on day one that we need to have someone who's a prosecutor. We have someone already that is able to devote some time on planning and the strategic aspects of the behavioral health court. And it is a small operation right now, and they're participating in that. It would only be as the program really truly expands larger that there'll become this pressing need that we have more resources for the behavioral health court. One other observation is that one of the reasons we can handle the behavioral health court as it is right now, which is in, I'll call it in the concept of crawl, walk, run, we're in the crawl phase of the behavioral health court, is because COVID-19 has really reduced the caseload for the prosecutors because there have been no jury trials for over a year. So once COVID-19 goes away and jury trials start to come back and the activity in the courtroom returns to normal, that's where the pressure point will be. So I just want to point that out for you. The third bullet point there relates to a software procurement that is meant to facilitate the responding to public records requests, both within the police department and for the rest of the city. The police department receives a large number of public records requests and is subject to the city attorney's office rules and regulations in terms of making sure they comply with Oregon law in responding to public records requests, but they are pretty much their own standalone unit compared to records management that really responds to public records requests in the rest of the organization. So together we're combining $25,000 each into a software program that will help us track and make sure that we don't drop anything as more and more public records requests are coming in with tighter and tighter deadlines and less opportunity for the city to postpone responding. The deadlines are much more, you must do something by this date, as opposed to what used to be within a reasonable amount of time, which can expand to quite a bit of time. So that's page 59. I'll just move now to page 66 of that same portion of the budget book. On page 66, there is a section that I like to draw your attention to. And let me get to that page, I'm sorry. At the bottom of the page, it talks about outside counsel and the cost of outside counsel. And I've always been one that wants to make sure that you understand the value that this office provides to you, the city attorney's aspects of things, compared to outside counsel. And we do use outside counsel. And as it says here, there's times where it's just such a big project, we don't have the bandwidth. There's other times where it's very specialized legal knowledge. We had that recently when we condemned a gas station that was known to have leaking underground storage tanks. That's nothing that we wanted to touch without experts coming in and helping us with that. But what I'd like to point out is that the hourly rates that you have for those private attorneys are running from $175 at the lowest to $875 an hour at the high end. Our budget right now looks to be about $165.95 per hour, all in. That includes your support staff. So I think we provide a really good value for the city. And I watch this to make sure that we can justify why we are employed by the city of Beaverton. The weighted average cost of outside counsel is $475 an hour. That's taking, we've only had to pay that $875 an hour rate for about an hour or two. We've paid a lot of $450 an hour rates. Our weighted average is about $475 an hour. So just so you understand where we're at in terms of our use of outside counsel. I'll then move on to page 85, which is actually in the insurance portion of the budget document. And that talks about, unfortunately, rate increases. And I wanted to give you a little bit more information. Again, we prepared this in March. We've gotten a little bit more information about what the likely rate increases will be for our various lines of insurance that we have. I can report to you that generally speaking, we're told general liability is likely to be about a 12% increase. We won't know for certain until June. Likely the auto liability will also be about a 12% increase. And then also our property liability is likely to be about an 8% increase. Everything else remains the same, a predicted 20% increase. But that is a little bit more refined than what was in the document, and we have that knowledge. The other thing I wanted to point out to you, and then I'll be done with my presentation, is at the very end of the on page 60, or excuse me, page 89 of the insurance document. There's a talk, there's mention about what our workers' compensation rating modifier is. And what that is it's a good way to compare how safe is the city of Beaverton compared to other organizations. The average organization has a 1.0 rating modifier. And I just want to say we have an outstandingly good 0.67 rating modifier. That's a real achievement for risk management and safety at the city of Beaverton. And I just wanted to give a shout out about that. And we hope we can continue to have that low of a modifier for a long time in the future. With that, I'm done. I'll open any questions you may have.
Okay. We'll recognize Nadia, or Councillor Hassan, rather. Sorry, Nadia.
I just have a general question. So on page 58 in trends, at the bottom, and it's actually the last line, so it's really easy. It talks about as Beaverton's population increases, the number of police officers increases. Is that normal in cities? That's the first question.
Based on my knowledge, yes, it would be normal that there's a ratio. There's some discussion about what that ratio should be, but as population increases, public safety also increases.
Okay, and then second question, and this might be more for Patrick, is do you see that increase in other departments, like other areas within the city as well?
Oh, I mean, in terms of as population increases, there's other.
Yes.
Well, I think that you would probably find, and Patrick, you can jump in as well, but when I think about the activities that CDD is involved in, there's going to be some sort of correlation, maybe not one for one. And then also the community events that happen, they're going to scale up because there'd be more people attending. Those are two things that come right away to my mind, but maybe finance director has other thoughts.
Yes, there's also a direct correlation to increase in population. When we're talking about population, it's also in relation to area served, such as in South Cooper Mountain, all the new infrastructure going there, which is going to increase population. So you have not only demands on police, because now they have to, they're serving a larger area. It's your water, sewer, storm, and street activities that will have additional cost impacts for providing service for water, sewer, storm, and streets. And then that kind of trickles into things like the garage, which will have more fleet, could impact the garage operations. And as Mr. Kirby mentioned, community development, the planning of that activity. I know that we're going through what we call Cooper Mountain, not South Cooper Mountain and not North Cooper Mountain, but I'd call it Middle Cooper Mountain. So that will have an impact on planning coming up that we'll need to start planning for. We've had discussions of that. So that will be something that will be coming to. So yes, population does drive increases throughout the city's budget.
Mr. Kirby, I have a question on page 60. There's a notable jump over the last few years in materials and services for the general legal services program. Can you illuminate to what's going on there?
I'm going to give you a preliminary answer, but I think this would best, we'll follow up in writing. But I know that the Westlaw, the legal research, electronic legal research that we use has expanded and the rates have gone up. But Mr. Auclair may have some other insight that I just don't have in front of me right now.
Yes, Bill, it's just one thing. It's your external legal counsel for the Comcast litigation.
Oh, okay.
$300,000 over the next, over a portion last year, mainly this year, and a portion next year.
Yeah, it is public knowledge that Comcast decided to sue the city of Beaverton in federal court regarding the city's authority to collect fees for their use of the right-of-way. We are in litigation. I won't say much more about it publicly, but that case is unlikely to, well, it definitely will not resolve this fiscal year, and I would be hopeful that it would resolve next fiscal year, but it's litigation, who knows?
Thank you.
And specifically, Chair Duggar, on page 77 and 78 of your budget document, it shows you historically in the previous years, we spent $35,000, 2 years ago, $60,000 last year. This year, it's estimated to be $250,000, and next year, $170,000. It's specifically for that litigation service.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Auclair.
Do you have any other questions for? I was sorry, Bill. Go for it.
No, that's. Yeah, are there any other questions? Yes.
Brilliant minds, right? I think we're okay then.
Yeah, I feel like the warm-up act for Public Works, but there we go.
Perfect. Thank you so
very
much. Thank you. Mr. Auclair?
Yes, we are on to Public Works. And that would be Mr. Lynn and his group. And he just gave us a wave.
Mr. Lynn, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Starting our presentation there is Jocelyn Blake. She'll be operating that. And I'd like to start by saying good evening, Honorable Chair and committee members. I'd like to thank the Budget Committee for your time and efforts for the review of our budget. I'd also like to thank the Finance team and the Public Works team that have assisted in creating this budget and presentation. Tonight, I'm joined by the Public Works leadership team, and as we complete our presentation, we'll be available to address any questions. We have, and go ahead and change next slide. We have the privilege of delivering our budget presentation this evening during National Public Works Week. This year's theme is Stronger Together, highlighting interdisciplinary work between Public Works, the city, and our community relationships. I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the contributions of our Public Works team in our current environment. Public Works is not traditionally recognized as first responders, but our staff provides many functions that protect the health, welfare, and safety of our community. Like traditional first responders, Public Works staff remained on site working daily throughout the pandemic and continue to do so. They remain present at responding to critical service needs during the fires last summer, and they're tasked with first response to critical needs like utilities, traffic, and transportation infrastructure. I'd also like to recognize them as sustained responders, tasked with the day-to-day operations, design, construction, implementation, and ongoing care and maintenance of our city's infrastructure. They provide sustained and ongoing services to the community through COVID, through the fires, and undoubtedly through the next challenge we face as a community. So thank you to the Public Works team, and thank you to our city partners, including the City Council, the community, and our partner departments for your continued support. Next slide, please. This shows how we organize the Public Works Department, how our work groups are organized. We fund 121 FTEs throughout not only Public Works, but in other departments as well. The first 6 groups you see are operational divisions. Then you see the engineering group. It's shown as a single division. However, it has several work groups within engineering that function as divisions, mirroring our operations groups such as water, sewer, storm, streets, and traffic. You can see under each division examples of work which was performed and completed by our staff over the past year. And we have some amusing comparisons to help frame the order of magnitude for some of the things you see here. So for instance, in water, there are actually more water meters that we service in our distribution system than there is population for the city of Sherwood. For streets, the amount of sand used in our last snow event was more than the weight of the Statue of Liberty, or about the same as 4 humpback whales. For sewer, the amount of lines cleaned is equivalent to the driving distance from Beaverton to Tillamook or Albany. I think many of the others are self-explanatory, and we thank all of our crews for their hard work and the City Council for their support and the accomplishments in what has been a very clearly challenging year. Next slide, please. In our capital program, we expect to bring 11 projects to completion by the end of the current fiscal year. The current and past water projects that you see here are focused on replacement and rehabilitation projects. This is creating a very, very positive downward trend in the number of main breaks and system failures we see in the water system. And our sewer lining projects have also reduced the amount of damage from intrusion of tree roots, mitigating damage in sewer issues. We had 0 SSOs, not would, I don't want to jinx this, but to date. In general, this is allowing operational crews to shift their focus from urgent response, usually caused by infrastructure failures, to preventative maintenance functions, which prevent failures. This is important as we're growing the system through new construction, like Cooper Mountain, South Cooper Mountain, or acquisition, like direct service from areas withdrawn from TDWD. And Councilor Hassan, I think that touches a little bit on some of your comments about population. So in some cases, just taking over assets may be driving our need. In other cases, it's growing the community and the infrastructure. That may relate to population, but it's also related to the area that we're covering in that. This doesn't eliminate the need to grow our operations staff, these efficiencies that we're seeing in the future, but it does ensure we're using our resources efficiently and strategically. Next slide. We'd like to highlight 3 key projects. The Hall-Watson project is a great example of a regional stormwater management project. It supports the downtown stormwater subbasin strategy. This is in order to meet our stormwater requirements. That supports our ability to develop and supports projects in the Beaverton urban renewal area in order to be able to support those projects and construct those projects in compliance. Our Erickson Trunk Sewer Phase 1 project. This is new pipe, which is more seismically resilient and has increased capacity and is less costly to operate. It reduces inflow and infiltration, improving capacity in the transmission system, and reduces the burden downstream for the cost of wastewater treatment. And last is our Meridian Pump Station. The new pump station supports the South Cooper Mountain area, experiencing the largest area of new growth for our water system. It ensures reliable, redundant service and fire protection within the Beaverton area. It also creates increased pump efficiency, allowing us to provide water to neighboring communities in emergency response, and supports our regional redundancy and resiliency to our neighbors. Next slide, please. This is a very busy slide. I apologize for that, but it's, I think, the heart of our budget request. So it's going to take me a minute to run through this one. It represents the major changes to our budget. And for our presentation, I'm not going to go through each line, but I'm going to jump to the significant requests. 2 new FTEs. One is for an engineering service analyst or a similarly classified position. It's memorializing work that's already being done in Public Works from a position on loan from the Community Development Department. This work has been focused on building, improving, and expanding Public Works outreach and engagement programs with the community. And 1 FTE to support the increase in our water projects as in the project engineer, and specifically to support the WIFIA projects. In 2016, just to give you a scope of magnitude, I think you heard this in the capital report, $4 million a year was what we were spending in water projects, and we're now doing around $58 million a year. So a 10 to 15 times magnitude of the value of work we've historically done. And we haven't really grown the department's capacity to deliver those projects accordingly. This position is an immediate need. We'll be speaking more about the long-term strategy for growth as we continue through the presentation. Organizationally, we're making some changes to restructure the department to adapt to the needs for both technical and administrative activities of the department, and more so in engineering, repurposing 3 existing positions, the city engineer position to a city engineer and assistant director. It reflects both the work that's being done today and allows for the repurposing of the currently vacant assistant public works director position. We're repurposing that assistant public works director position to an engineering services manager position or something similar in classification. We've discussed over the past year the desire to create a technical and administrative track for our engineering group. This recognizes that we can reward, promote, and utilize different skill sets within the work group separately. Technical skills, those of the engineers to do technical work, and administrative, operation, and business skills. May still be engineers, but a different set of skills to accomplish a different type of work that's just as necessary in our engineering group. This utilizes a vacant position to provide that position and supports the personnel management, workload planning and distribution, and business functions of the department. And lastly, a vacant project engineer position to a project manager position that memorializes work that's being done in Public Works from a position on loan from Community Development. And it's work that will continue to focus on transportation, street, and sidewalk improvement projects. We're also recommending the upgrade of 2 positions, both project engineer positions, 1 to a project engineer 2 and 1 to a project manager 2 position. This recognizes work currently being performed in the department by incumbents at the program manager level versus the project management level. So these are people managing full programs in Public Works. And it aligns that divisional and program work between engineering and operation work groups like water, storm, sewer, and the street work groups. There's additional changes that are going to come that are not part of the budget. This will be something initiated by our Human Resources Department, and we're working in conjunction with them. I won't get too specific into it as it's not part of the budget, but it deals with supervisory pay, compression, and management pay. And we're going to be bringing that forward on the same day as we bring some of the budget, but it will be a separate item. Project delays and deferrals. From the proposed budget to the recommended budget, you see a $3.8 million fund reduction impacting 5 water replacement and rehabilitation projects. This is largely driven by revenue and funding impacts related to COVID, but it's as much a staff resource concern when we look at the workload across the department. And staff work is being focused on WIFIA related projects and water line rehab and replacement are being supplanted. We don't believe adding additional FTEs today will resolve this in the coming fiscal year. And again, we'll speak more about strategically adding FTEs to mitigate future impacts related to staff capacity. In deferrals, we've recommended deferral of 2 vehicles. Really, those specifically are to review and consider electric vehicle models, which is a priority of the City Council. They have an opportunity to do that. Their vehicles generally have a 5 to 10 year life. So our fleet group is relooking at vehicles up for replacement, deferring when possible to allow time for electric vehicle consideration, the actual vehicle itself, but also including the development of infrastructure. We're working in conjunction with other departments and outside agencies related to the infrastructure needs to support electric vehicle transition in the fleet. And I'm not sure if you saw in the news recently, but Ford announced this week a fully electric light duty pickup truck for commercial use. So that's very exciting, and we're looking into the availability and viability of that for potential future replacements. We're deferring a water operations FTE. That reflects expanded work and increased specialization in the work group. We're delaying it for practical and financial reasons, but it is something we'll need to return with in the future. And in capital outlays, we had reductions in the ADA and the LED deferrals, again, largely related to COVID revenues and funding in our street fund. We expect being able to return to current levels in future years, but we don't anticipate being able to catch up with increased contributions as we return to normal. It just is going to push the timeline out a little bit. For LEDs, we have approximately 1,000 heads ready for replacement. We anticipate doing about half that work in the current fiscal year, the other half in the remaining work in the next fiscal year. We estimate about an $800,000 need. We've had $500,000 in the past, but we anticipate or estimate about $800,000 needed to finish the project. Our operations group programmed completion of the work in the next fiscal year. We're redistributing that workload to different functions that we still have in the department, but there is capacity, we believe, to complete that work if funding were provided. Next slide, please.
Mr. Lin, before you go, I have a
Yes,
quick
sir.
question.
Yes, sir.
Can you explain, there's a $1.35 million contribution to ODOT and from for a bike pedestrian improvement. Typically for those things, I'm excited about it, but that is actually quite a bit outside of the Beaverton city limits. Can you explain why Beaverton is contributing that? It's in Tigard.
I actually believe the Hall Bridge is Beaverton.
No, that's the Hall Bridge is it's the one down by 99. It's not the Hall Bridge by Washington Square. That one is in Beaverton. The other one is in Tigard. I just pulled it up myself.
There's actually two Hall Bridges, and the one that we're contributing the money for is the one by Washington Square.
Correct.
Well, the ODOT project, yeah, okay. It just says between 99 and Ploth, sorry, however you say that, Fawful Road, which is on the project site, is in Tigard. So if you're suggesting the other one, then that's good news, but that's not what ODOT says.
So I guess let me say it this way: we're not contributing to the Tigard project.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
I can definitively say that.
That is perfect to me then. Thank you.
All right. Moving on to the next slide. This shows our total expenditures across the various funds that support public works. I'd like to highlight only about 2% of our expenditures are general fund expenditures. The bulk of public works is funded by special taxes, funds, or utility rates. You can see that the water work is clearly dominating the workload in the future. General water construction is remaining relatively constant at the moment, but the WIFIA projects are moving almost $10 million in the next year. And again, just to frame that, this is about 10 or 15 times our historic levels of work from the work group, and again, clearly dominated by the CIP associated with water work. As you look to the graphic of the dollar, we see how each dollar is spent. Almost half of our expenditures are directly related to capital at work. And when considering all work, materials, supplies, capital, and infrastructure, it's about 78% of our budget going directly to project work. The remaining 22% is related to personnel, debt service, and internal services. It is interesting that in the current year, materials and services has surpassed the cost of personnel services for the first time in recent history. And since the beginning of the pandemic, it's a lagging indicator, but the Engineering News Record, or the ENR Construction Cost Index for Seattle, which is what we base our costs on, saw nearly an 8% increase. And this is the same index we use for our SDCs to keep up with increased costs in construction materials and labor. So that has actually surpassed our cost of personnel in the upcoming year. Separately and more recently, we're also seeing a sudden rise in cost of fuel. Certainly not surprised given the national and international events, but depending on how long that lasts, we may be returning for additional funds for the city fuel costs, and potentially another reason for pushing for electrification. Next slide, please. There's 68 projects in various stages of progress and development that are part of our workload. 59 of those are significant work in the next fiscal year, with a value of about $74.3 million. Most of that, almost 75% of it, is related to water projects. There are currently 4 major CIP projects for each available project manager. Some may have more, some may have less based on project size. And generally we program about 1/3 or 1/2 of a project manager's time for each project. This accounts both for their project time and their associated non-project work. So customer service response, interdepartmental collaboration, planning for future projects. Currently, each project manager that we have is programmed at about 130% to 200% of their available capacity. So structurally, you can see where that leads to delays, increased work demands, and limited availability to participate in future projects. And so adding an FTE is going to help that. And when we talk about the long-term structure for growing the department, we'll get into that a little bit more, which is the next 2 slides. And so if we go ahead and go to the next slide. It brings us to our challenges that we're facing. And last year I referred to it this way, and I'll do it again this year. I call this the depressing slide. We have one more slide for you. I hope we're going to end on a more inspiring note. We actually have 2 more because we added one based on the conversation earlier on about tying some of the focus and priorities to work that's being done. So we kind of on the fly put that together, but hopefully we'll end on a little bit of a more inspiring note. And I'm not going to go into detail on each one of these, but I'll highlight some various things. The good news about staffing is that we have many wonderful projects to support and improve services to the community. That's now and into the foreseeable future. Based on the volume of projects and work, we need additional resources, including people to keep up with the pace. It's not that we're shy to ask for more resources right now and today, but it's about asking for the right resources. We have a variety of tasks that program and project managers are doing that could be performed by technical or administrative staff. We fully expect to be asking for additional resources and supplemental and future budgets, but we want it to be the right work, the right place in the organization at the right cost. And we don't want to just keep asking for more project engineers. That doesn't necessarily solve the problem. We also wanted to support the future success of the department and the organization, which brings us to the organization and how we organizationally structure this. And that means growing the next generation of people that we'll rely on while we're meeting today's demands. We talked about how much time we spend in each program for program managers. Inclusive of that should be time for more senior staff to mentor and grow our mid-career staff, and the mid-career staff to mentor those starting their careers. How we program our work and availability of resources should support those outcomes. And for instance, when we may be able to hire more consultants in the short term, and I fully expect that to be part of our strategy in the short term, but we need to have people to manage the consultants' work, and we don't want to lose our own competencies by doing that. And there's also a premium often to that cost. But the best way for new engineers to learn project design and management is to work on smaller projects with oversight and mentoring from mid-career engineers. If we don't do that, it's possible we'll have the right number of people in the future, but we will not have developed or grown their competencies, including how to manage consultants and their work. When we look at expansion, we look at our capital work, and there's a trend we're moving toward a focus on new and expanded projects. As resources are being challenged, this is happening more at the expense of maintenance and rehab of existing infrastructure. The projects exist, but either due to funding, opportunities, or just the demand on resources, we're seeing more significant delays in those projects. In the short term, that's probably okay, and it's probably prudent to focus on some of our expansion, especially given what's going on in the community and the development of those outside areas. But we'll need to be diligent about ensuring this is not a long-term shift, and that we return to a more balanced array of projects. That may include more resources to increase the amount of work we can accomplish, longer timelines for project delivery, or a combination. And we also understand that these are things that we need to bring to the City Council with more information and for consideration of options and priorities. We understand that, and we're working towards that. We know that there's a space challenge at Public Works. We have an aging and insufficient facility for our size and scope of work. COVID has exacerbated those challenges. As we look forward, we're located at the easternmost area of the city while we're growing the city to the west. That's a future challenge we're anticipating and working towards solving. We look forward to the facility's master plan and helping create a strategy for our space needs, both our size and our location. COVID, and I'm sure you'll probably hear about these challenges and impacts 1,000 times as we go through the budget process. I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but I want to call out the material costs and increased lead times. This has been a lagging indicator. It didn't hit us in the beginning of COVID, but it started hitting us in the mid and end as we're nearing ideally the end of COVID impacts. We expect it to continue to be lagging, meaning it took time for shortages and costs to increase, but it's progressed through COVID, and we see that continuing, and more competition for resources and longer lead times for resources. We expect demand to increase while supply and logistics continue to lag. So this is increasing the risk of cost and increasing the risk of delays. Some good news, we had a bid opening today, which was actually under the engineer's estimate. So that was very promising. We're very happy to see that, but it is a concern and it is on our radar as a risk. Next slide, please. Moving forward and hopefully to be a little more inspirational, the current budget is making strides to support the future development of public works. We'll continue this work in the next fiscal year and build upon that going forward, strategically asking for more resources, including people in the future, completing our internal work to identify the best resources. A lot of that was delayed. For some of the new folks, I joined the city in February of 2020. I was here just about 30 days when we went into COVID lockdown and spent about 3 or 4 months just figuring out how to operate day to day. And so that really kind of threw us off. So we're returning to that work, asking for the right positions with the organization to support our work today, grow and mentor our team for tomorrow. Community outreach, the current budget recommendation supports memorializing one of those positions, and it supports the work in public works and expands it. And we'll continue to focus on building out this program and increasing our community involvement and participation. Project delivery, building increasing city council touch points into project timelines and deliverables related to project development, priorities and impacts, providing quarterly CIP updates, and engaging the city council earlier in CIP development process and priorities. I think we're on a good path. We're working on achieving balance between the fast pace of projects and extreme demands on our resources, with a slower pace than anticipated to catch up the department structurally and the resources to keep up with that demand. So our hope to speed that up this year, hopefully with a little help from their universe, being cooperative, we'll get there on a little bit of a faster timeline. This would have completed our presentation, but Jocelyn, do we have the, there we go. We added this slide based on your conversation a little bit earlier today. It doesn't directly tie the budget, but it does tie what we see as priorities and focus of the department on public works activities. I'll call out some of the specifics that I think are, it's not actually on here, but in our improve the sidewalk and pedestrian experiences, our operations team had a very creative way. I believe you approved, the council approved a contract that included the ability for residents to utilize our ADA sidewalk contractor when they're in their neighborhood to fix their sidewalks. It's at their expense, but this is a contractor that's already mobilized in the area. And so it should be at a very good cost savings. And that leverages our ability to improve sidewalks without the city actually spending money. Vehicle electrification, we talked about some of that in our Make Ready infrastructure program. You'll hear more about that from some other departments, but that's essentially, you have a vehicle charger and it's everything we need to put into place behind that charger in order to make that ready for the charger to come and support the actual electric vehicle. And we know traffic calming has been a concern of the council. The commission is reevaluating that and we'll be returning to the council with recommendations for how to update the traffic calming process. With that, I will thank the committee. I'll complete our presentation and the Public Works team is here for questions.
Mr. Lynn, I have a question. Is there any sort of evaluation process when you determine investments in the community through an equity, diversity, or an inclusion lens? Can you talk anything the city does in that regard? Thank you.
So I would say from the public works side, we're probably a little bit trailing specifically in the DEI function of how you evaluate those projects. We're talking longer term about actually creating a CIP evaluation process to bring forward to the council, how the staff would make recommendations, that being part of it. We're making investments citywide to create that inclusion process. The closest thing we have to that today, and if you'd like us to speak in more detail, is we have a nomination process for CIPs that's open to the community to nominate CIPs for specific work they'd like to be done. But I would say we're less we're less so honestly in how we evaluate that under that lens. And we know that, and we're working towards that.
Thank you. I'll recognize Member Gallo.
Thank you, Chair Duggar. Chad, first of all, outstanding set of slides. I mean, Jocelyn, good job. Great way to summarize it. I'd love to go back to that slide. I don't want to go back. That slide that says how you're spending the money, the dollars that are cut up in bits and pieces.
The dollar chopped up?
Yeah, the dollar chart. That's to me where, I mean, you guys have probably heard, you haven't because you're relatively new, but the rest of the Budget Committee has heard me now for years talking about how important it is to make our residents fully aware of how we're spending the dollars and the priority of the projects that we're spending on, infrastructure and how it's worthy of, being in the newsletter, in the newspaper, and making our residents aware of that. I think that slide deserves to be there because again, what you guys are doing with water, and again, I just can't, I mean, what you guys do, what you and your team does with your resources is, I have no words for it. You just guys do a phenomenal job. But the problem, that's not the problem. The problem is that the stuff you're doing with water is there is no, other than the tanks and the wells and the ASRs, there's no shiny objects that you could, bring to our residents and say, look at this beautiful shiny object. A lot of it is underground and it's not going to be seen. Well, there you go. Mark, thank you. Yes, that's exactly right. So somehow get the word out there because that incredibly shiny new object, most people are taking for granted because they can't see it. It's underground or it's hidden behind trees or in pumping stations that nobody can look at. Phenomenal job. I just can't stress enough about we're spending a lot of money in areas that are taken for granted or traditionally invisible. And I'd love to get out of that mode and make those efforts more visible. You guys have heard this before.
Did you want us to bring that slide up again or just?
No, it's not to me or to the council or the budget committee. It's to our residents. That somehow, how do we convey that message to the whole city, to everybody who resides in Beaverton? So,
and ideally in this budget, we have someone that can help us with that.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. I'll recognize Councillor Tivnon.
Thank you. So I served on the City Club Board of Governors a few years back and remember a study about the overwhelming number of miles in the backlog for the city of Portland, just in terms of grinding down aging asphalt and fixing it. And I mean, I can't go into it the way you could, Chad, but like the amount of inches that you have to grind down depending on how long you've waited to attend to it adds an enormous amount of money to the overall cost of doing it. And the city of Portland's to the point now, it's like they'll never catch up to it. You'll just be off-roading your way through most of the city from here on out, hanging up your car in temporary pothole-filled streets. Out here, our streets are pretty smooth, but I'm sure it's a constant shell game of trying to stay on top of, like you said, that existing infrastructure versus building out new infrastructure. And this might be readily locatable, but is there a tracking place where we know how much of a backlog we have in terms of grinding and repairing not only our streets, but also our bike paths, when those routes start coming up and making them unnavigatable by bikes and pedestrians and folks in wheelchairs and whatnot. Are you tracking that, and is that getting factored into the budget every year?
So I would say two different questions. So the answer is yes, we are tracking it. There's a couple of different ways that happens, and I know our city engineer is on, and he may be able to get a little more specific. And we have some of our project managers with us and our street operations manager. So I'll certainly call them to speak up if I say something incorrectly. But we start with a PCI, a pavement condition index, which is fairly high. It's in the 70s, I believe, in the low 70s. So that's an incredible score, really, for a city our size. One of the challenges with that number is it's kind of an average. So there's some streets that are in incredible condition and some streets that are not. I think if you followed the Portland challenge, one of the things is the cost is exponential to fix streets. So once we fix a street, we kind of want to stay on top of it to not let it get to a degraded place where it's costing us exponentially more money. So when we talk about the budget piece, so the second part of the question, we're a little bit in a transition right now operationally, talking about how to dedicate more resources towards what I would consider the maintenance part instead of grinding and overlaying, so that we can keep those up, and transitioning the savings in doing that towards the streets that are either in more need, or in some cases, the idea of the sidewalk expansion with our crews. So is that answering your question?
Yeah, I think it's just that heading it off at the pass before it gets to a place where we see them reach such a level of degradation that it's costing us so much more than if we had done preventative work early.
Yes, I mean, the answer is yes. And I think the big challenge is there's sort of a cliff. And once it goes over that cliff, in some cases strategically, and and I really do mean this in light of the DEI question, it may not be sensitive under that lens. So I just want to be very forthright about that. But from the strictly economic lens, in some cases, it's better to let the streets that have gone off the cliff go, to keep the streets that haven't gone over that cliff yet from going over the cliff. Because it's cheaper to maintain them and keep them up than the street that's reached that point of degradation. And so it's a very delicate balance, and it's one we're going to struggle with in the future where that cliff exists. Does that help?
Yeah, and I guess I would just say that I am keeping that very carefully in mind as we're thinking of all the new green build out, greenfield development, that we have a whole lot of city that's got existing infrastructure. We have to make sure we're investing into it. I think a lot of it's easy to lose sight of that there's still an investment to be made there in addition to new ones. But it's top of mind for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Recognize Councillor Hassan.
Yeah, two questions. The first one, it goes back to my original one, is Beaverton population increases. How have you seen that reflected in your staffing in Public Works?
So when we talk about it from a population perspective, it's from the engineering side, it's probably the population number is lagging because we're building the infrastructure today to support the population of the future, right? So those places that we're talking about bringing online haven't been built yet. The population doesn't exist yet, but we have to build the infrastructure for that to exist in order for that to happen. So we need to be, our growth should be on the engineering side, should be leading that edge. And then that should be followed up potentially in a shift, depending on how much the next level of development looks like, into the operations and maintenance and the care and feeding of what we've now built or how it's been built. And so I think both of those, and I don't know that it's necessarily a direct, in some cases it may be a direct correlation, because even if you do infill and you add, you may have to expand the system in order to increase density. And so there is a correlation. I don't know that I can give you a one-to-one, but what I can tell you, and I think the Mr. Auclair alluded to this, it also kind of affects the expansion of the city as a whole, meaning if we need additional people or community development needs additional people, and that's another vehicle, or that's another desk, or that's another office, at some point it also trips growth in, we may need another mechanic at some point as we add more vehicles. It may need more building support to support our offices. We may need more human resources people because now we have more. So there's, it's not a one-to-one ratio, but you see, I think you see population driving some of these needs that are definitely correlated. And then as you expand and grow the city, you're going to see the internal services have to grow to support the agency. And I don't think it's one-to-one, but it's definitely corollary.
Okay.
And quite frankly, causal.
Yeah, and that's super helpful. Thank you. And then just two comments. One, appreciate you talking a little bit about the programming about middle management and entry. Like, I think that's a big body of work in terms of allowing folks to have career growth. So just want to take a moment and recognize that. And then the last comment I wanted to make was you talked about the ability for people to request through the website. And so I'll look into it myself, but just something to be thinking about is when we say things like SIP, do people know what that means, and are we defining it and making it as accessible as possible so that people can understand what a capital improvement project is and how they could actually submit for that? That goes back to that DE9. Do people even understand the foundation of what that is? So just something to take back and think about. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to recognize Councillor Sansucci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Lynn, and everybody else who has come out here to share the Public Works budget with us. Let me start my comments by saying it's just always great to see the great work that the teams do out there in the field. You know, the city of Beaverton works. The city of Beaverton looks good. The landscape is well maintained. The trees are in good condition. The flower boxes are awesome. The streets are swept. The sidewalks are in mostly good condition, and we know when they're not. We are getting through the projects that we have on this massive list of projects that need to be done, and they all get done really well. So congratulations to the team. For the most part, you know, I don't really have specific comments on line items in the Public Works budget. You folks probably buy some of the weirdest equipment there is in the whole city. And I love you for it, because we need that weird equipment. It's what's necessary to make all this stuff work. And for those on the budget committee who have not yet been out to watch sewer pipe being dragged underground for one of these large projects, it's worth it just to watch it happen. I also want to address one of the things that Gallo said. You know, the city does have a marketing team, and we have a PR team. And I think, you know, our hope when that got funded a number of years ago was that the departments would be able to take advantage of those resources to help get some of those great messages out there in a more effective way. So hopefully that kind of synergy can keep going forward. There are occasionally some challenges, though, and you know, I've had a few conversations with Mr. Lynn over the last couple months about some of those. And you know, I've been thinking about it carefully as I've been reading the budget. And a lot of them, you know, some come down to communication. And so I think, you know, you mentioned it in your presentation. I think there are a number of instances where we still have some communication work to do. Because while everybody's very busy doing all these millions and millions of projects, we who are responsible for the money and responsible for the presentation of these projects to the public have an interest in how they're done, how they're funded, and how they're communicated, and what the outcomes are in certain categories in particular. Because of the amount of dollars involved, I think, you know, there's sort of this elevated need for us to understand what is the status. So you came to the council recently, gave us updates on projects that had some budget issues. That's great. That's one of many kinds of communication that is really helpful. The other piece of, and this is no news to you or to anybody else, the other piece of communication that is really crucial is that CIP document and the information that goes in there. And, you know, as I look at this one, I see a couple of things. One is that it's really not complete. There's some funding charts missing. There's some identification of funding sources that have not been included in some of the project descriptions. I understand COVID and complications and you know, government structure transitions cause hiccups. But I think the point I want to make is that we still have work to do on this CIP. So I consider my approval of this CIP in the context of this budget to be provisional, because there are a few details in there that I think are not quite right yet. You know about a couple of projects that I have some significant concerns about, where we have some ongoing discussions with funding partners to complete before we can be really confident about some of the numbers that are in there. So I just want to say that from my point of view, while I may, by the time we get to voting on the budget, be supportive of the CIP essentially in its current form, I'm not supportive of all of the details. And we still have to work on some of those details to get those sorted out. There are a couple things, though, that I want to bring specific attention to. For instance, there was a comment in the section on the Hawken Road, the short section of Hawken Road, I think it's project 3408, where it says for fiscal year 21-22, determine whether or not to construct the project or on its own, or to keep it incorporated with the Canyon Road intersection improvements project. That's a question that needs to come to us at your soonest opportunity so that we can have a conversation about that, because that implies that there's a significant decision to be made. And that's the kind of decision that I think the council at the very least wants to be involved in. There is the subject of the North Transmission Line intertie and when that's going to take place. And then I want to say, I'm going to revise my comment about accepting the CIP in its current form provisionally. Everything at the end of the CIP related to anything after this current fiscal year still has to be discussed. There are some suggestions in there about projects that will happen in future years and when they will happen and how they will be funded. We have not yet had an opportunity to talk with your team about any of that. And so I just want to tell you that that's all made of silly putty, and we're going to have to talk that through. Other than that, I mean, I just want to emphasize, you folks do great work, but we've got some communication work to do, and we got some finish work to do on the CIP. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would like to recognize the floor for Mayor Beatty.
Thank you, Mr. Duggar. Chad, when I reviewed this document this year and really looked at the work of Public Works, and I think, the unpopular opinion is that Public Works really is our most external facing part of our agency. And since becoming mayor and taking over constituent inquiries and responses, the vast majority of people talking to us is about stuff that touches Public Works. And so I recognize your need for communication and staff support because it is a lot, and every single interaction requires so much work from your team to make sure it's done correctly, that we hear them. Things that, about sidewalks and stuff like that, that seem really innocent on its face, are really complex issues that take a lot of archiving. And I think in the form of government and the shift, and as well as a lot of our senior managers and stuff starting to retire, we're losing some of this institutional knowledge about why projects were done a certain way. And so what I didn't see in the budget that I would hope to see in supplemental or something else is kind of that plan to retain information. We are seeing a ton of retirements from Public Works at like every single division. And, we've been talking about streets up in West Slope and stuff that had happened in the city 20 years ago. And there's just no documentation of it. So I do think there's a need for that. I also see a great need for organizational restructure in Public Works, and how many people are reporting to who, and the kind of people that are managing, and the kind of issues that arise when you have not the right kind of management structure, too many direct reports. And so I know this is a provisional budget and we're going into a lot with the new city manager, but I think those are things that are important to me that aren't in here right now. And I know you touched on a couple of those things. So I hope in supplemental, I hope we continue to have these conversations. Like Councilor Sansucci, there's a ton of space where the council wants input in what you're doing, because your division is so ingrained into the community and so important to the city council, the work that you're doing. So I do think there's opportunities to work on communication, but we got to help you do that by supporting you with the right kind of budget ask. So I look forward to supplemental and what comes of that. Thank you for the hard work on this, and thank you for the work that your Public Works division does on behalf of the city.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Fagan.
Yeah, following up on the comments previously, Chad, thanks for the presentation and for acknowledging the need to increase communication with council and the need to discuss and probably debate a little bit about the CIP process. In the council meeting we had last week, well, I guess it was last week. I made some points about the WIFIA project and the North Intertie connection, or the connection to the North Transmission Line, to be specific. I won't harp on that again, only to say that's a really important project for our community, that builds into our community resiliency that we need in case of anything that happens to the North Transmission Line. To the South Transmission Line. So getting connected to the North Transmission Line so the whole city has water is really important. And touching on some of the other projects that we've discussed, one of the things that has come to my attention, and I think it's pretty much human nature, that it's hard to sometimes go outside the building to ask for money. And I want you to know, at least from this counselor, and I'm assuming from most of us, please ask our neighbors for help with projects that are joint projects or projects that are in our CIP, whether it's the county or whether it's the state or whether it's the feds. If there is money available and it fits in with something we're doing, or if we have agreements where they're paying proportional shares, ask. And if you need ask at the political side, you need help with other elected bodies to move projects forward, to collect money for the city so that we can get this work done. You know, you've got a whole bunch of counselors that are willing to make phone calls, willing to have coffee with other electeds from other agencies to help make your work easier, because we're a team at this, and I really appreciate your work, and I really appreciate the work of the whole department. What Councilor Beatty said, or sorry, Mayor Beatty said, is exactly on point, where we hear from our constituents more about things that are in your department than any other. And it's important that you have the tools to do the work that our community needs. So thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like there are no more questions. Patrick, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, did you want to take a break, or do you want to go right into the general fund, continue on with reviews?
That's a question for everyone. Give me thumbs up if you want to break, thumbs down if you want to continue as is. Looks like 50-50. How about we do not take a break? Let's keep powering through. But those of you that need a break, please just turn off your camera and take whatever you need. Thank you so much.
Okay, so just for the record, we got through all of the public works department budget. And so now we're starting on what we call our general fund summary, and that's going to be on at the tab that says General Fund Summary Review. And that's going to start on page 541 of your budget document. And we just wanted to give the council and the budget committee a chance to go through the revenue side of the general fund, because it's the city's largest single fund that has basically 60% of all the FTEs work in the city's general fund. And its revenue source is very, very diverse compared to water fund has water sales. A sewer fund has sewer services. And so the revenue sources are very diverse and broad. And it gives a chance of the budget committee to take a look at those revenues, maybe ask me questions if I have any trends or thoughts or concerns going forward. I'd like to start on about page 550 and 551. This is where the general fund revenue starts. And I'll just leave it to the committee to ask me questions by page if they had any particular questions on any of the various revenue sources coming in from the city's general fund resources. Any issues on pages 550 and 551? Oh, Councilor Sansuzi.
Yeah, Patrick, I asked you a version of this question by email, but I'm going to ask a slightly different version here. I think one of the things, as we look at this revenue section of the budget nowadays, there are now way more individual line items related to right-of-way and licensing fees pertaining to right-of-way or utility licensing fees. And I guess the broader question that I think is helpful to us in understanding the budget is to know, of those 20 or 30 line items, which ones go where automatically and which ones drop into the general fund and get reallocated, through the general fund allocation process. Are there some dedications? And you mentioned in response to the email, there are two, the new privilege taxes where we set them off to a right-of-way reserve, but there's about 25, 26 other line items related to right-of-way. And I don't recall which ones go straight to street fund, which ones go straight to this or that or another place. And I wonder if that could be captured somewhere sometime and maybe become a regular part of the budget document, this revenue chapter.
Yes, for just in general terms, everything that's in this particular section of the revenues, which is on page 511, 550, 551, 552, 553, and even continuing on to 554, all through class 10. All of these revenues accrue to the general fund, but those two accounts, 504 and 505, are the designated ones that are privilege tax, and that's under council's review. What gets transferred to the city street fund, if you go back to page 550 and 551, you'll see an account 310. It's called right-of-way fees to other funds. And this is where we take a portion of the right-of-way fees, and you can see that number is negative, meaning it's taking of all the classifications of right-of-way revenues, it's transferring funding from the general fund to other funds within the city. In previous years, they were used to help with street fund overlays, and also for some of our debt service on the Beaverton building. And if you take a look at the narrative of the 1.930 million that's budgeted for this next year, it shows that it's going to the street fund for the street lighting program, and then $600,000 for the overlay program. And then there's a couple of catch-up years for true up of property taxes that would have gone to the street fund, street lighting fund. And the amounts that we received in property taxes were a little bit higher than what we'd estimated, so we did some true up.
Well, thank you. It's just it's in the context of this budget, this larger the full budget. It's a little bit unusual to do a transfer this way, or to see a transfer presented this way. So I guess I kind of missed that. Thank you for the explanation.
Yes, and we just found it easier to put all the right-of-way revenues into the general fund and let the general fund then just move a portion of that over to the street fund, versus saying, well, let's take 5% of each fund, of each one of these accounts, and put each one of these accounts in the street fund and get 5% of the revenues coming in. It's just easier just to transfer it. And this allocation is also at the discretion of the budget committee in the city council. They can say the general fund, we need to transfer more money to the street fund to assist with overlay programs or any other activity of the street fund. So that's purely at the budget committee of the city council's directive to make any changes. Continuing on, is there any questions on page 552 or 553? If not, going on to 554 and 555. I did want to note in the middle of page 554, the state revenue sharing account 322 and account 324. They seem to have a positive increase in the COVID-19 pandemic for those types of taxes coming into the city of Beaverton as an allocation through the state for liquor taxes. Going on to any page question on page 556 and 557. I did want to note in account 563, that's the state marijuana tax. You can see that the estimate for this next year is going down quite a bit, and the revised estimate for this year is going down a bit from 370 to 345. This is purely due to the new allocation of state marijuana taxes based on Senate Bill 110 passing. That's where they took a portion of the revenues that used to go to cities, and now they're held by the state and used for, I believe, some treatment activities and treatment funding. And so the city is not receiving the level of state, their share of state marijuana taxes that we had enjoyed in previous years. And then also on that same page, just want to note that towards the bottom of the page, there were all of the county, the CARES Act money that we received from the county or through a direct allocation for some business assistance, and also activities that we received in reimbursement for our city's expenses in managing the COVID-19 pandemic. And then at the very bottom of the page, count 578, the federal ARPA fund allocation from Fund 102. So this is anticipating that in the supplemental budget of the $16.5 million that we're receiving from the federal ARPA funding, that council has kind of given the green light to go ahead and include a $2 million reimbursement to the general fund for its revenue losses. And that same account will be in the building fund, showing revenues coming in for funding from the ARPA fund. Continuing on, any questions on page 558 and 559? And I did want to point out towards the bottom of page 558, account 371, court fines and forfeitures. I'm continuing to anticipate a decrease in the revenues coming in. One, just due to, we have not, similar to doing shut-offs for the water utility, we have not turned over anything to collections since March of 2020. We will be through the court and through Judge Britton's communications with the City Council, determining when we will start to turn over items for collection, because we have a new collection agency on board. The council approved to start that process. We haven't given them the green light yet, and so I think that Judge Britton will be reaching out to the City Council to figure out when we would like to go ahead and start that collection efforts again. But so I'm anticipating continued declines in not doing those collections, plus also in just the general citation generation revenue for what we call our automated systems, red light running, speed through green, and photo radar, just because of volumes of traffic aren't quite up to par yet pre-pandemic. And then officer initiated citations are still down. Just one, they still cannot cite for vehicles that have failed registration or expired registration tabs. That I think the state is passing additional legislation to further delay that. So we still have some ongoing COVID-19 revenue reductions in the court.
Patrick, it looks like we might have a question from member Zatzmary.
Zatzmary?
Yeah,
Dave?
Patrick, just a quick clarification. You just mentioned we're going to get 16.5 million from ARPA.
Yes.
But in the budget manager's summary, it says 17.5 million.
That is correct. And when I get to that fund, I will be explaining that. The 17.5 million was an estimate, and we thought that's what everybody was going to get. We were just a portion within the billions of dollars that are allocated to states, and everybody got a shave. And so the amount coming forward is now going to be different. I'll explain that when we get to Fund 102 in about 10 or so minutes or so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, but good observation. Going on to page 560 and 561. Any other questions on those sources of revenues? I do know that on the City Council, there's some questions about the TriMet contract, and I do want to point out that on account 391 on page 560, that's the reimbursements that we receive from TriMet. They pay us the exact cost of the officers that are dedicated to the TriMet, plus about, I think it's a 5% administration fee for us to track all this information. So that is about a $800,000 reimbursement that we receive from TriMet for the use of our officers for TriMet services. See any questions on the next page, which would be 562 and 563. Then I did want to point out on the middle of account on page 562, revenue account 756, the PERS reserve distribution, 665,000. In order to help the general fund maintain its contingency, we are recommending transferring this amount in a similar amount in the building fund to help those funds keep their fund balances. It will be reducing our PERS reserves by $1 million, 600 and some odd thousand here, and about $300,000 in the building fund. What that will do is that will reduce their portion of the $4.2 million reserve in total. They don't want to make that point that was part of our internal budget review to say that to help the general fund and its resources, that this was a good nexus to helping fund the $2.5 million PERS increase, of which the general fund is about 66% of that amount. And then continuing on to page 564 and 565, these are basically the transfers in from their various operating funds for various overhead costs for the general fund, providing general administrative services to the other funds. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm done with the general fund revenue, unless there's any other general broad questions concerning the general fund revenue streams.
Yeah, I think we're good to go. I don't see any questions.
Okay. Going on to the next program is the general fund non-departmental. And this is basically a cost center, and I'm looking at specifically on pages 575 and 576 of the budget. The general fund non-departmental is kind of a cost center for general costs of operating the city that's not really applicable to any one department or function. So it has things like our general membership fees that are up at the top, such as our membership fees to things such as the biggest one is the League of Cities for League of Oregon Cities, and then other communications expenses for maintaining our citywide telephone systems, long distance charges, and then banking services fees, and then our safekeeping, third-party safekeeping fees, lien search service fees, just general things that are not really applicable to any one department. But there was one item on account 511 in professional services, a large expenditure request of about $500,000 for facility master planning consulting services. That budget request was received a question from Mr. Sansuzi and member Kamath about what that is for, and that question is being asked of Abigail Elder and Jerry Allen. My understanding right now, it's a placeholder to just have a funding there so we can have that discussion with the city council as to what that's going to look like and what the scope is going to be. So that's mainly a placeholder. And I think that we'll be giving you a formal response to that question for Monday's meeting.
Councilor Sansucci, did you have anything?
The future agenda look ahead that we got about 3 or 4 weeks ago said that we would have a topic on our May 4th council agenda to talk about that facilities master plan item. But because the agenda got kind of squeezed and squashed with a whole bunch of other things, we didn't get to it. And so I think all of us on the council are anticipating a work session class discussion with the team to talk about the facilities master plan, to understand the scope of work and the objectives of that. And Mr. O'Clair's depiction of this as a placeholder is exactly right.
And then continuing on to that fund on page 577 and 578, these are mainly transfers from the general fund to other funds, specifically mainly for assistance with capital projects in accounts 514 and 515. And then continuing on to page 579, again, some just general transfers from the general fund. The biggest one being transfers to the information systems fund. If you think that 66% of all of our staffing activity resides in the general fund, then the general fund really supports all of the costs of operating our city's network infrastructure. And so, although it is a big number, $2.1 million, the total ISD budget is about $4 million, showing various funding transfers coming in from all the other funds, but the general fund being about specifically about $2.1 million. Now, there are some scattered within the budget, there are some direct allocations for specific programs such as the municipal court. The municipal court helps pay for one of the business analyst programmers that supports the new court system. The police department has 2 FTEs that are dedicated to the police department for IT services. Same with the library fund, it has a dedicated FTE dedicated to the library fund, and they transfer resources to the information systems fund to help provide that technology. I did want to bring to the consideration account number 980. That's the contingency right-of-way future use. This is the account that Councilor Sansucci was referring to, the right-of-way revenues that come in for the PGE and Northwest Natural Gas Privilege Tax. And I believe in the communications that I sent out earlier this afternoon, there's a spreadsheet that reconciles all of the revenues coming in from those 2 revenue sources over the period of years from 2015-16 through the proposed budget, and then the uses that council has designated that is okay to use this designated resource to fund these activities. If you wanted to take a look at that schedule, we can review that at either Monday or Tuesday or Thursday's meeting next week. If you have any questions, just give that to me. I do go through the budget and figure out what should be allocated or charged against that revenue source, meaning there are things in community development about affordable housing that I pick up. And then we have the debt service on the portion of the $14 million that the city received in bond proceeds to fund for specific projects, those being the Public Safety Center funding gap of $7 million, the City Park Fountain, the Plaza Gateway enhancement, and then a little bit of reserve that we have remaining, and we'll get to that on the following page. We flip to the following page on page 581 and 582. Up at the top in account 993, out of the funding reserves, or the funding that for all of that $14 million that we had designated for what we call other civic projects, we still have about $1.47 million left. That can be used to help with other civic projects. It's not tied to anything in particular. We mentioned things such as we could use it to help remodel Griffith Park building, depending on what comes out of the space planning study and what the council would like to fund in making renovations to that building. I also think that as the city park gets further and further into construction, they're going to find things that we're going to need to modify or fix or change. So there'll be some change orders, so that might be a little extra funding to get through the city park construction project. And so that funding source could be dedicated or could be used from this remaining bond proceeds. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm done with the general fund non-departmental section. If there's any questions from the budget committee?
I think we're good to move on.
Okay. Then if the committee would like to turn their page to page 585, we're looking at what's called the general obligation bonded debt. And as the city council can recall, we issued a $33.8 million bond issue to fund the public safety buildings construction. It's a general obligation bond that is repaid by it's a voter approved debt, and so there's an actual tax assessment as part of our property tax levy. And this page on the information on page 585 shows the future principal and interest payments that are remaining on that bond going through 2037. And then if we turn the page to going to page 590 and 591, this is the revenue side of the bonded debt fund. It has a small contingency of $240,000. And then we have our current year property taxes, what we need to levy to make the current year's property bond levy payments. And then if we turn the 2 pages to page 594 and 595, we see the debt that will be paid next year of 995,000 in principal, $1,079,000 in interest, and that'll leave us about a 262 unappropriated ending fund balance to have for next year's operations and managing our principal and interest payments on this particular debt. And Mr. Chair, do you see any questions in the chat on this particular fund?
I do not. I think we are okay to move forward.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen on this next fund because this is the fund that we will make an amendment to. It'll be item number 10 on that, what I call that amendment packet number 1. So I'll be proposing an amendment. So I did want to kind of share with the budget committee what that will look like. And let me share my screen here. So on your screen should be what's on page 601 and 602. So we anticipated, as Mr. Zatzmary pointed out, we anticipated almost receiving 17.5 million in revenues under the American Rescue Plan Act, and that has been reduced to $16,859,058. And that came from the Federal Registry. So I went on the Federal Registry probably about a week and a half ago, found that they did make a reduction, and they made a reduction across the board on all participants in this program. So when we were in the I think the National League of Cities meeting and the U.S. Conference of Mayors meetings, it was all notated that everybody got a little bit of a reduction in their funding. So what will occur in the amendment are two things. One, when we recast the budget after making changes that are going to come from amendments that we're proposing and any other amendments that the budget committee would bring forward, we're going to adjust these two numbers to be the following. They're both going to be 8,429,529. So it's about a $326,000 reduction in both years. So this estimated amount will be reduced by about $326,000 for the current year, and then we'll reduce the proposed year by the same amount, about $326,000. What that will do is that once we recast the budget after all changes, since this number will change, our beginning working capital will also reduce by $326,000. Then we'll realize the additional $326,000 reduction for next year. And so when we look at our contingencies, then our contingency are what's available for the city council to allocate to projects and to other functions is going to now be $13,882,323. So it's basically $326,000 and change doubled for a reduction. So that will be part of what will come through as an amendment to the proposed budget to reflect the reduction in the ARPA funding revenue. Any questions on that?
Yeah, we recognize Gallo, Member Gallo.
Thank you, Chair Duggar. Patrick, I'm less concerned about how we show the money that goes going into the budget as I am the process that is going to be used by the council, Madam Mayor, and the budget committee for actually distributing this $13 million. What are you envisioning be the process for deciding how those $13 million are going to be spent?
I could take that for you, Patrick, if you'd like.
Thank you, Madam
Mayor, let me give a little introduction. There is a 150-page document of all of the source, how this funding can be used. So it's not funding that can be used for anything. There's specific restrictions set by the federal government. And we've had many meetings, and it's changing probably week to week because the Treasury keeps giving us new guidance because we keep asking questions. well, can we do this particular project or fund this particular thing? And so, and when you have, 3,000 entities across the United States asking questions, it's going to take a while for the final rules to come forward. So that we have that, and then I'll turn it over to Mayor Beatty.
Yeah, I'm not one to give false hopes, but the spending of this money is really going to be a policy decision set by the city council rather than the budget committee. The budget committee is confirming or moving stuff around, and this really isn't the venue to have those conversations. But with that being said, we're really working hard with our state lobbyists, our federal lobbyists, trying to bring in excess Rescue Act money to make sure that our pot stays as big as possible so we can do things. There's a ton of stuff that was stripped from the budget that likely this would qualify for moving some of our priorities forward, like a mental health court, backing up some of those funds. But it comes over, like Patrick said, over 2 years. We have 4 years to spend it. No one wants to be the elected official that starts spending the money out of the gate as fast as possible, and then realizing we couldn't have spent it that way, and then we have to go backfill it with general fund. And we want every level of government doing what they're supposed to be doing. We don't want to have to use this money for housing. We don't want to have to use this money for public health. So we really have to work with our state government, our county government, to make sure that they're doing everything possible with their money. So that way we could really use this as a way to ignite the economy. And it really, the early indications from the Treasury and everything else, like this is one-time use money. It's not meant to be programmatic. It's not meant to be long-term. It's also not meant to just backfill a reserve and sit in an account. So Patrick has to go through the arduous Treasury details on what actually, because we might think it qualifies and it might not. And then I think what the council is going to have to do is have a decision. And I don't think we're going to make it among just the 6 of us. I think we're going to want input from our community and what's important, but we're going to be really clear about how much of that is going to backfill the budget and then how much is left to spend. And so I don't think the council is really ready to have that conversation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's very appreciate that. That's very helpful.
And another thing I'd like to comment on, and it's again, I want to give credit to the city council and the city leadership about going through the COVID-19 pandemic. We did not lay off a single person in the city. And Mayor Beatty can probably attest to that. There are numerous mayors across the country that had to reduce staff. Now that this funding for ARPA can be used to rehire those positions. So that's what some cities are doing. We are in such a fortunate position because we kept everybody on payroll. We don't have to backfill. We don't have to hire anybody. We are fully staffed how we need to go going forward. Granted, we have some reductions in vacancies, but that's due to the fact that the workload's not coming in the door. Once the workload starts coming in the door for site development and the building fund, we'll bring those positions back, and that they'll be funded with current revenues and not having to use this federal funding. So we're actually in a great position to use this for, as Mayor Beatty says, for what you call the term gets escapes me, but it's for good things that are going to make a positive impact to our community.
And as Mr. Wilson reminds me frequently during our weekly conversations, Oregon's in a really good place with this money because we're not a sales tax state. So our revenues weren't hit the same as other parts of the country that were sales tax based that really had to use that money to backfill in a different way. So we're in a really advantageous position. And I think the council wants to take the long view look to how do we really use this money to do the most good, because that's why the federal government gave it to us. That's why they gave it to cities. Cities were not direct funded in other rounds, and mayors and cities across the country fought and asked for us to have direct funding because we understand our community better than anyone else.
Thanks so much. Member Satmary, you have the floor.
Yeah, Patrick, I just have a sort of a silly question that would help me understand something. With the general bonded debt, we got authorization for 35 mil, but on the next page it says we basically have 33.8 mil. And what is the differential? And then on the bottom, the principal is 32.1 mil, but I'm assuming that's just because we haven't paid it off yet. But what about the differential between 35 and 33.8? I just don't understand.
So when you go to the bond market, you can sell the bonds at a premium. So we issued a par value of 33.8, but we got about $35 million worth of bond capacity just because of the market. We offered a very competitive rate, so people were willing to pay above par to have the ability to earn a higher interest rate than what the market was currently paying. So we got a little bit of what would you call a premium on the bond sale.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Claire, doesn't look like there are more questions, so looks like you can move forward.
The next budget is the special revenue debt fund, and this is where we have the funding for basically it's divided into two types of repayments. One is for the PRCA, the $21 million that we borrowed for the building of the Patricia Research Center for the Arts. And then the other portion is about the $14 million that we borrowed for other civic projects. And those other civic projects are, if you take a look at on page 606, in the very middle of that document, it shows how the $35 million was allocated, $21 million to the PRCA, and then the various funding for the Public Safety Center, the City Park Mountain, the Plaza Gateway, the Central Plant, and other CIP projects. And if we turn to the details of this document, coming into page 612 and 613, this is the revenues coming into paid debt, and there's two sources of revenue. One is from the general fund, and that's for that $14 million portion for what we call our civic projects, and the other, and that's sitting in account 411. In account 442, that's the transfer from the transient lodging tax fund. We were relying on the transient lodging tax fund to pay the debt service on the $21 million worth of bonds that were borrowed to construct the Patricia Research Center for the Arts. And so that's where this funding comes from, the transient lodging tax fund to this fund to then pay its portion of debt service. And if we turn to pages 614 and 615, you will see the various components of the debt service for each component. I do want to explain one thing. The council and a lot of the budget committee members can recall that we knew that the transient lodging tax fund was going to have resources issues due to COVID-19. So when we passed the bond issue to fund its portion, we did the first 2 years as interest-only payments. And that's why on account at the top 716, you see 747,100. That's the principal only payment for this year, and then for next year, the $784,000 interest only payment for the next year. And versus on the city side, we have principal and interest payments. So on the $14 million portion of the bond issue, we had transfers in from the city's general fund to pay its portion of 2020, what we call A2 city projects, it's principal and interest. What you'll see in the next fiscal year, which will be 22-23, there will be another line. It's probably going to be maybe 717. It'll be bond principal payments 2020 A TLT revenue bond. So they'll have to start paying principal in the next fiscal year, 22-23. And we structured it because we knew that transient lodging tax fund was going to have resource issues because of the decrease in transient tax lodging tax revenues coming forward due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, any questions on our special revenue debt service fund?
None in the comment section, so
all right,
feel free to move forward.
The next one is the assessment debt service fund. It's a very, very, very small fund. We didn't even print the full details. There's only about $1,600 in this fund. This is what's called a special assessments can, and other nomenclature could be local improvement districts. So you only have two very small local improvement districts that are still active. It's the 7th Street LID and the, can't remember the other one. It was, I think it must have been the Lamar Gardens LID. just a few assessments that are still outstanding. And when we funded these two particular local improvement districts, we actually funded them in-house. We didn't go out in the market and borrow money to build these infrastructure projects for mainly neighborhood redevelopment. We borrowed internally, and so these funds, I think the 1,600 actually goes to a storm drain fund, because the 7th Street LID mainly did a lot of storm detention activities to alleviate flooding in that particular area in the neighborhood. So it's a very small fund, but we still have to have it because we still have activity coming forward. The next fund is the Water Debt Service Fund. I'm going to turn on my light because it just got really dark outside. So sorry, it kind of looks like I have a halo above my head now. But so this is our biggest debt of the city. We have our water utility debt, and we have 3 bond issues outstanding on page 621 and 622. The bottom of 621, we have a little bit remaining on what we call a revenue refunding bond. So when the bond market improves, meaning we have lower interest rates, just like when you refinance your mortgage, you'll take advantage of refinancing mortgages for a lower interest rate. Governments do the same thing, and they refund their bonds. So they borrow new money at a lower interest rate and use that money to pay off the existing debt of that's still outstanding on the old bond issue, and then you start making payments on the new bond issue. So it was a private placement debt with a key bank, and we have a 5 more years worth of debt service on that refunding bond issue. The next bond issue was in 2018. So we issued about $18 million. And again, this goes to the question by Mr. Satsmary. If you read the narrative on the bottom of page 621, we borrowed the actual bond issue was 18.125, but we sold it at $3 million worth of premium. And the reason that we do that is it's a lot easier to sell a bond at a rate higher than market, because investors like to have something that's going to give a higher rate of return in future years, but they're willing to pay more money for that bond today, and that's where the premium comes in. So we actually got about $21 million worth of revenue out of the revenue bond under only issuing $18 million worth of bonds. And then the next one, it was in April of just this past year. We issued $21 million worth of revenue bonds. And that should read 28 million instead of 21 million. That's an error on our part. This should be 28 million. In that middle of page 622. And again, it was also sold at a premium. The next page is on page 623 and 624, shows our debt as it is going into the outer years. And I did want to mention that we have in the budget a plan for issuing another up to at least a $25 million water bond issue in probably about this time next year. And that will be used to, again, finance our water project construction, along with the city's participation in the Willamette water supply system projects. So we do have in the budget in the water construction fund to receive about at least $25 million for the bond proceeds to finance projects. Now, that also is contingent upon the council passing the various instruments to authorize the issuance of the debt that will be forthcoming in the next fiscal year. And plus, once you issue debt, you have to pay for it. And so part of our rate analysis, and the city council and the budget committee has seen this, is that we are proposing a 66 cent increase in our CCF rate beginning, I think it is September of 2021, to one, provide the funding for not only the utilities operation, but also this new debt that we'll be issuing in May of next year. And this is right
October.
on. This is
October
right-
1st.
October 1st. Thank you, Susan. So, so this is right on target with our plan to issue debt and our plan for water rate increases going out into fiscal year 24-25.
Any questions for Mr. Eclair? Mr. Eclair, I have one, more of a comment, and this was brought up in the last budget committee, I believe the supplemental, but I can, and it kind of coincides with what a couple of the counselors have said tonight, and Member Gallo, I believe. With the increasing of rates, I still think that's a huge opportunity for us to communicate that out, not just the rate increase, but the why. I constantly, one of the few things I hear consistently is why we're in such a water abundant region, it seems like we pay way more than what you get. And I understand that. I'm fortunate enough to be on this committee, so I understand that. But I think it highlights another opportunity for us to get in front of our residents and just use that power of the city and council intended to explain and engage people. And I think you would have a much better response in general. Just want to highlight that.
That is a great opportunity, especially with the person coming on in Public Works, their analyst, that we can help, tell the story. Because us as water consumers today, we're benefiting from what the ratepayers did 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, it was probably painful then because they're building capacity that we are enjoying. So part of our charge is to build capacity today for 2040, 2050 users. And it's kind of like, you're paying it forward, sort of. And although it is painful today, we're building infrastructure to provide services for 2040, 2050. And a new water, and what is also very interesting is that new water sources do not come forward very often. Us joining Tualatin Valley Water District in the city of Hillsborough, going to the Willamette and piping that water all the way from the Willamette up by Wilsonville, all the way through Sherwood and up to Ray Rogers at 175th, and then back over for Grabhorn, is a very expensive process. It's about $1.3 billion project, and we're only a 5% player. But that 5% is still about $70 million to us. And that's the biggest capital project we've ever participated in. It's big, but it'll provide 5 million gallons of water when it's complete per day. And that we won't need that until 2040. So it was fortunate that it came forward. That we can participate, but once we're building it, we have to incur the debt, and then incurring the debt, we have to raise rates to help pay the debt. And we just need to, like you say, Chair, is to tell the story.
Yep, completely. Recognize members at Mary.
Patrick, just so I understand this, I'm sorry. On the top of page 621, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bonds or potential bonds, 5 million, 20. 81 and 25. You mentioned one of them was 28.
Yes, so there's an error in the narrative where it says on April of 2020, the city issued $21 million of revenue bonds.
Okay.
That's correct.
That should be 28. And where does that correspond to on the top of 621, or does it?
On 621, the top of 621,
you've got 5, 18, 5, 20, 81, and 25.
So the 20 million, the 21 that should be 28 is referenced in the paragraph that says, or the sentence starting in the third line, water revenue refunding bond series 2016, 2018, and 2020. So that's the 2020 bond issue, the 21. Okay. The ones after that are additional debt that the city is working on closing. We did close the $81 million WIFIA loan that has been closed. We're actually making our first draw on that loan as of the end of this fiscal year. The EPA is reviewing our drawdown request. So we're taking our first draw on that particular loan. And then we are still in negotiations on the the $20 million through what's called the IFA. That's in about the middle of that paragraph. The IFA, they need to review our latest bond, water master bond ordinance, which authorizes to issue the $81 million WIFIA loan. And so the IFA needs to review their documents in consideration of our new obligation under the WIFIA loan. And so although we've been working on these two loan documents for probably about a year and a half, we hope to have them finalized and brought to council for formal adoption, hopefully by the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, thanks, got it.
I do not see any further questions, Mr. O'Clair.
Okay, that takes us all the way through what we were planning on going over for tonight's presentation. So, Mr. Chair, you can adjourn the meeting and continue it to Monday at 6 o'clock.
Do I need to make a motion, or is it just sort of
Nope.
an adjournment? Well, let's 9:02. Let's adjourn until Monday at 6. If you have any questions, please remember to email them to Mr. O'Clair before the meeting. And I look forward to seeing you all. Thank you so much for your patience with me, and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Well
night.
done, John.
Good night. Well done.